Hello everyone. Welcome to my teaching learning process. I am Sonal, taking care of your BA courses, and we are continuing with General Psychology, which is BPCG 171 Unit 3. So as we continue with cognitive processes, which talks about attention, perception, and learning, memory, and thinking, we continue with perception. Speaking of perception, let's just understand again what is perception. Perception is taking in all the information from your sensory organs, which is all the five sensory and other sensory stimulations and sensory units that we have on us, and then interpreting it meaningfully and deriving meaning is called as perception. So once we take in information from our sensory information, that is called sensation. And once we start interpreting that meaningfully and give something which is relevant enough to revert to the environment is called perception. So now understanding that perception had a huge amount of organization and disorganization, which is how can we perceive properly? How can we perceive relevantly? So there were laws given by Gestalt psychologists who were Kurt Kafka, Wertheimer, and Wolfgang Kohler, who were Gestalt psychologists, and they stated that we have some set of rules. So, with the help of these rules, they stated that we can aid our perception. Perception can look more relevant. It can help organize smaller units, larger units to form something which is as a perceptual organized system. So once we are able to organize something in our perception, it becomes more relevant, it becomes more meaningful, and the interpretation makes sense. So this as a concept was given by Gestalt psychologist. Also, Gestalt stated as the psychologist and as the entire perspective and idea by them was the major idea by them was that whole is bigger than the sum of the parts, which suggests that we cannot break our perception into pieces. We cannot break up our images that we receive from the outside to the inside into pieces. I'll give you a very good examples. If any one of us had been to any older times Diwali Fete or Diwali Mela, you might be seeing in the earlier times we had a box which had reel of images moving along. So the images went after the other and you could make sense of the entire story. Now imagine if the images were very slowly moving, which is they were breaking into parts. We could not make sense that what the entire reel was all about. Similarly happens in our movies also that we go out to cineplexes. Cineplexes are so advanced today that they move so rapidly that they look like a movie. They look like a series of events and make sense to us. Imagine if one clip happened, then space, then another clip happened, then another clip happened. With so many gaps, the perception is broken and it does not make sense. So, according to them, according to Gestalt, the major thought by them was that whole is bigger than the sum of the parts. Now, for to aid people's perception, to help them support perception, they gave some laws which were called the Gestalt laws of perceptual organization. Let's begin with the first one, the law of similarity. The law of similarity talks about that similar things tend to appear together, coming into groups, or are visual, and our vision actually catches similar things together, no matter it's vision, no matter it's auditory, no matter it's the kind of smell. For example, if this kind of smell, a similar kind of smell is coming from this or area, you might avoid it or you might purposely go from that place. So speaking of that, there's another perception which is called the law of pragnance. Pragnance as a term suggests good figure. So the idea of this perception is that we are always looking forward to make something which is a good figure. So we want to look at things as holistic. So when we talk about pragnance, law holds that when you are presented with with a set of ambiguous complexes or objects, which is confusing stimuli, confusing objects, your brain will make it appear to be together. So that's what the entire idea of pragnance is. Pragnance means the whole figure, the good figure, which suggests that the good figure is trying to say if any item which is kept scattered, which is kept unorganized, or it's confusing, the first impulse that our brain does is to make them appear similar, simple, and make some sense out of it. So, simple ways we make a sense out of an ambiguous or probably a confusing object or a stimuli. The best example here could be given as Olympics rings. When we find rings coming together and set together, we usually assume them to be as Olympic rings. So why do we do that? We do that because we have this habit of seeing everything organized as that, as Olympic rings. So whenever we see circles, we presume that this might end up being as something which we call as Olympic rings. So the idea behind the law of pregnancy is to see something as a good figure, which means in simple ways, if you see anything which is complex, unorganized, ambiguous, your first idea of your mind, of your brain is to organize that into simpler connected form, that it makes sense to people. Now moving to another law of perception, and this is a image which will help us identify all the laws of perceptual organization. So let's move to the third one that we have. This is called as law of proximity. The term proximity means together, like seated together, close together, lesser space in between. So this law suggests that things are close together seem more related than the ones which are not together, which is the one which are spaced away. So for example, when the circles on the left appear to be on one group and the other appears to be other. For example, you can see the image over here. The image suggests here, those three circle dots together and those three circle rows of dots together. So we take them and see those three together and these three together. So this is what is called as law of proximity. Speaking of the next one suggests to be as law of continuity. Continuity simply suggests that anything, continuity holds that any point that are connected straight or curving line are seen to be flowing in a smooth pattern. So we have this idea, our brain assumes that whenever we see any stimuli like that, we will assume to be them to be connected when they are closer, when they are curved, or when they are joined with something. So law of connectivity, do you see those dots? When these dots are actually arranged in a pattern, we see them to be together because we see that pattern happening. So because of the continuity that we assume, because of the law of perception, organization, which makes our environment simple and makes our perception more quicker, and the past experiences also supports this. Now moving to the other, which is called the law of closure. The law of closure is something which I feel happens to be one of the most common laws around us. We perceive elements that are belonging to the same group, even if they're incomplete in nature, we see them as a complete entity. The example of law of closure is such a beautiful example over there. Shape made in kite, which is broken down from the two sides, but despite of that, you see that as a diamond or a kite. So either of the two is complete because of the fact that our brain actually ignores the contradictory information and wants to see everything as complete. And closure makes the entire form to be complete. We will be able to understand that this is a diamond figure, irrespective that there are gaps or the figure being incomplete. Now, let's move to the last one, which suggests that there is another law which is called the law of common region. Gestalt stated that the law of common region states that when elements are located in the same closed region, we perceive them to be belonging together. So, as soon as we see that anything which are actually located in a closed region as in an area, not proximity, not close together without space, but in a region together, we tend to sense that they are together and they make sense only when they are together. So these circles are right next to each other, so that the dot at the end of the circle is actually closer to the dot at the end of the neighboring circle. But despite how close these two dots are, we see the dots actually inside of the circle. So see, we find a pattern despite having the circles there and the dots inside. Despite the dots outside, like the two circles and the external dots are so far apart, but we made sense that there are circles and there are two dots similarly placed in a circle. So that's what we call as the law of common region. This can be found in multiple areas around us when we try to find out things which are placed together in a region to be together. So let's take an example. If there's a class and we find some children, a group of five, in a row, with some spaces but in a row sitting together. We assume that these people are together despite we have an entire class, but we assume them because we find them in a common region. They seem in a similar row every day, so we assume that they might be friends, we assume that they work with one another comfortably, etc. So this finishes with some examples of Gestalt law. See, we could see the law of Prägnanz, the Olympic rings on the image. We could see the law of similarity, proximity, common region, closure, and continuity. This completes with the law of Gestalt, which is called the perceptual laws of organization. Also remember, creating a clear defined boundary can overpower other laws such as law of proximity, which is very true. If you actually create boundaries over such things like around an area, like for example, if I would have created a boundary away from the circles, the law of proximity would have actually overpowered because you are actually defining that these things are together. So that's one important thing that we should need to know, that whenever we find things actually outlined and bordered, they seem to be together far more closer than any other. So this completes with the laws. Now let's move to a different set of idea and content in the same unit, which is unit 3. We move to 3.5, which talks about learning. Learning is a very fascinating cognitive process. Why learning is because of which we all are learning and consuming content. We are acquiring new things. We are able to understand concept around us. We are able to grasp information from the outer world. So learning is defined by Barron is a relatively change in behavior. So when we speak about learning, always remember it will comprise of few components to be residing into it. First, it's going to be relatively permanent, and there's going to be some changes. Because it's relatively permanent, you find that change in the behavior, and if the behavioral change is resulting out of experience, then the change would be actually defined as relatively permanent. So we have three things to act to make sure that learning takes place. One, that it's permanent relatively. Second, that it would be bringing about some changes in behavior, and that relatively permanence comes in from where? It comes in when we are experiencing something. When we have an experience of something, the change tends to be far more permanent than any other. Your acquisition is far more permanent than any other. Let's move ahead. Let's understand, as I said, what relatively permanent is all about. So, relatively permanent change is an important thing because behavior changes that you tend to have are not temporary, such as also at times, sleeping after taking drugs, having heavy meals, or feeling tired due to illness. These are very temporary. You cannot take them as something which is a relatively permanent change because it is happening because of an external environment change. Second, permanent change due to aging and maturation is not considered in learning. So always remember, when we speak about you having changes in your cognitive process, especially when we find our grandparents and our parents getting old, then they're forgetting things, they're not able to acquire information very quickly as you. Always remember, this change in their learning is because of the fact of aging, and we do not consider it to be a relatively permanent change. In comparison to the other, when we talk about taking heavy meals and sleeping, so people who have a pattern of sleeping after heavy meals, that might become a relatively permanent behavior because they experience it every day in a pattern, and overlearned patterns of behavior becomes a habit which are acquired as learning. So they can be considered as permanent at times. Also, learning can also occur through vicarious learning, which is can occur through your own experiences and also by other people's experiences. By other people's experiences, we mean that when we are observing others. So these are some key points when we talk about how learning is permanent. Now, moving ahead, let's talk about some theories of learning. Learning is always being always been supported by theories because we cannot prove. Like for example, when we talk about psychology to be scientific, when we talk about psychology to be objective and systematic, the first thing that we will always have is we will have a theory to prove that something is systematic, it's logical, and something is like any other sciences, provable and testable. So theories support our statements to make it more scientific. Learning is comforted and aided by three theories that we have. The first is learning by association. So, this theory, when talks about learning by association, suggests that we are acquiring knowledge, we are acquiring any other activity, skill through association. So, there is some sort of association. Now, association is between a stimulus and response. We all know that behavior, which is verifiable, testable, and observed, which makes it quantitative, is actually supported by learning principles. So when we talk about supported by learning principles, we need to know that learning aided by association means that there are association between stimuluses and response. So there are going to be some connection between stimulus and response. So let's move to the second kind of introduction of learning, which is learning by consequence. This learning is one of the most simple learning, a kind of learning that we all see and we actually are using in our day-to-day language, living, which is operant learning and instrumental learning. So the term operant itself suggests that there are some kind of behaviors which make it possible for us to learn something through a consequence. So some behaviors that we voluntarily do because we need a consequence. So remember, here the learning happens because of a consequence. When we say because of a consequence, it suggests that you are willing to accept that consequence. That's the reason that you learn. So your learning is now based not on the response, stimulus and response, but it is based on what comes after the response. Speaking of learning by association, this is going to be a learning which is called an SSR or R learning, which is stimulus leading to another stimulus, which leads to a response. And learning by association, stimulus reading to a response because it knows there's a consequence after the response. So you are learning not because of the stimulus, but because of the consequence. Let's move to the third kind of learning, one of the most popular learning that we have times of our childhood, and even today I feel, even as adults, we all are learning through it, which is called learning by watching others, which is operationally called as observational learning. All these three are given by different psychologists. Let's get into them and understand them individually, what these learnings are actually all about. So, learning through association is also called as classical conditioning. It's called classical because it was one of the most prime, one of the most first that came up. That's why the name classical is given. There is no other idea behind it. Also, classical conditioning suggests that learning occurs when an association is formed between a previously neutral stimuli and naturally occurring stimuli. So it's trying to tell us that, when we make an association between stimulus and stimulus, out of which one stimulus is a neutral stimulus. What does a neutral stimuli mean? We will learn all of that. A neutral stimuli is a stimuli which does not evoke a response, which means it does not give a response. When we speak about a naturally occurring stimuli, it means this stimuli is capable of giving a response. So when we say capable, that means it automatically elicits a response. It could be a very what do you call this? Involuntary stimuli that happens to us involuntarily, whereas neutral is not involuntary. Neutral is a stimuli which takes care of the fact that it will not evoke a response. So if you show that stimuli, nothing will happen. But when we show a naturally coming stimuli, a response will automatically take place. So we associate these two stimuli to get out a response. Now, how was this explained? This was explained through an experiment given by Ivan Pavlov. He actually saw, Ivan Pavlov was a physiologist before he turned into a psychologist. And being a physiologist, he was always experimenting on dogs, and he was lately finding that his dog was salivating whenever the food was presented to him. So, what did he do? He associated the food with the bell, and the response was salivation. So, let's understand the combination of this. The dogs was naturally salivating at the sight of the food or at the coming of the food. So, food is what? A naturally occurring stimuli. Why food is a naturally occurring stimuli? See it yourself. Whenever you know there's an amazing amount of meal which is about to come, don't we all drool a little? We all have that mouth watering feeling when we know that there's an amazing lunch or there's an amazing breakfast or dinner. So that's a naturally occurring stimuli which will always give a stimuli, always give it a response which is called salivation. Now, bell does not give us any response. Why? You ring a bell, nothing will happen. The bell is indication of zero. The bell is indication of nothing in place. So these two was associated. How the dog was harnessed in a enclosure, and there was a what do you call this? An entire tube which was harnessed around his put around his jaw, where the saliva used to collect, and there was a saliva metric board, which is something that could measure the response, which was salivation. So once this dog was harnessed like this, they started, Ivan Pavlov started the experiment. So here, learning occurs by forming an association between a naturally occurring stimuli and a previously associated neutral stimuli, which leads to a response. So what are we doing? When we talk about classical conditioning, we are conditioning a response which is involuntary in nature, which is that we are conditioning the dog, and the dog does not have a voluntary will that should I salivate now or later. So as soon as the food is there, the dog starts salivating. Does the dog has any control on the stimuli or response? Actually, not. These are very involuntary responses. Then the neutral stimuli must occur before the naturally occurring stimuli. So they say that the association should be the neutral and then the naturally occurring stimuli. The focus is on automatically naturally occurring behaviors. As I said, these behaviors are involuntary, they happen to be automatic. You have no control over it. So let's understand it by the image beautifully. See, what is happening before the conditioning? We have an unconditioned stimuli. Let's understand it through this classical conditioning. Do we see the term called unconditioned stimuli? Unconditioned stimuli is a trigger that leads to an automatic response. This is that naturally occurring response, naturally occurring stimuli. The food is the unconditioned stimuli. Why? Because it's leading to the leading to the dog running around shivering for food and all excited, mouth watering for the food, and the result is salivation. So we have an unconditioned stimuli, which is food, and an unconditioned response, which is salivation. These are associated because they are automatic in nature. The dog has no control over it. That does he really want it and or doesn't. Now, what do? We feel that we want to condition the dog with the food. How do we do it? That we get to know that the salivation will happen every time. We introduce a neutral stimuli. What is a neutral stimulus? That does not, as you see the next pointer, does not trigger a response at all. You ring a bell. Will the dog do anything? No. Why will the dog do anything? Because the bell is indication of nothing. That's why the neutral stimulus, no conditional response. Now what do? We associate the neutral stimulus, then the unconditional stimuli, and then comes the response, which means we ring the bell, give the food, the dog salivates. Ring the bell, give the food, the dog salivates. Now see how does it happen? You ring the bell and make the dog understand that the bell is an indication that the food is coming. Ring the bell, food, ring the bell, food. What is happening? You are having an association between a neutral stimuli and an unconditional stimuli. So when there's an association between a neutral and an unconditioned stimuli, the unconditional stimuli will automatically lead to a response. So this during conditioning factors happen to happen for approximately 10 to 15 days by Ivan Pavlov. And what did he see? He did a test trial. Test trial was to understand did any sort of association did take place. So he rang the bell but did not give the food. But what happened? The bell was an indication that the food is coming. The dog started salivating. So what did we do? We did conditioning of neutral stimuli with the salivation. Now the bell neutral stimuli becomes the conditioned stimuli. What is the conditioned stimuli? It is a So bell, period over tells us what? Period over is an unconditioned stimuli. It tells us that you have a sense of freedom. You can close the book and stand up in the class and go around. And despite knowing that the bell is rung, there are some teachers that still keep teaching. So what happens? As soon as you hear the bell, you shut your books. So what did we do? We rang the bell, associated it for completion of class, and you got the freedom. So freedom is as a unconditional response, because period gets over, what you understand that this unit is over, now we move to the next class, we need to shut this book, and we need a sense of freedom to go to the washroom, move around. So as soon as we ring the bell, ringing of bell associating timing is up, sense of freedom. So there are times, when the bell is rung, but the period is not over. We shut the book and get up, and the teachers are like, "No, the period is not over. We still have 5 minutes. It's a wrong bell." So see, did you realize how is conditioning taking place involuntary in the form of classical conditioning, which is association between stimuli, which is leading to a response. So this is one of the most famous and one of the most proven conditionings that we have, which is called the classical conditioning. Let's move to another, which is called as learning through reinforcement. Speaking of learning through reinforcement, this is a kind of learning that takes place that involves operant conditioning, that involves strengthening or weakening of behavior by using a consequence. So consequence could be anything. Consequences could be reward, can be punishment. So when we talk about operant conditioning was given by B.F. Skinner. B.F. Skinner is sometimes referred to as this operant conditioning is referred to as its instrumental conditioning. Skinner created a conditioning in its form in a Skinner box. So there was a box that was associated, and that box actually explained the entire behavior. So in operant conditioning, there are three factors that we need to always take care of, which is learning occurs when behaviors are followed by either reinforcement or punishment. Next, the consequences must quickly follow the behavior, which is, you need to have a consequence to make sure that the response happens. And these consequences should be given to the child or the person or anything that you're doing an experiment quickly, because else the person will forget that there is a consequence coming and the behavior might not take place. And these are voluntary responses. These are not like classical conditioning. These responses happens voluntarily. So this starts with operant conditioning. Let's go through the example and the Skinner box that actually took care of the operant conditioning. So instrumental conditioning, another term is operant conditioning, a kind of process which is first described as B.F. Skinner. In instrumental conditioning, reinforcement or punishments are used to increase or decrease the probability of a behavior that we want to have in future. So this completely depends if you really want a behavior to take place or not. How was this Skinner box devised? This Skinner box identified two kinds of processes, which is reward and punishment. Let's understand that punishment is given to decrease the behavior and reinforcement, which is rewards, are given to increase the behavior. How did this experiment took place? There was a speaker, there was a light, there was a lever, and there was a ped, the food pellet where the food fell down. Now this rat, a hungry rat, was sent inside. This experiment happened in two forms. Once in a very hungry rat was sent inside, and as soon as he went inside, he was running around the entire, Skinner box to find out where is the food, where is the food. But the food will come when you press the lever. So stimulus is hunger, response is pressing the lever. What is the consequence as the reward? You get the pellets falling down. So in the beginning, the rat took a lot of time, a lot of minutes to come down to that and press the pellet. So when we found that the rat took approximately 15 minutes to press the lever in the first go. Now the second day happened, the rat was sent out again, and when the rat was sent out again, the rat took lesser time, lesser than 15 minutes to crack punch the liver. The liver was pressed and the rat ate the food. As the time went by the seventh or the eighth day, it was found as soon as the rat was sent in, the rat pressed the liver. See, there is hunger, which is voluntary. The rats want to have food, so when he wants to have food, he or it will press the liver. That's how voluntary responses takes place. The fact that this conditioning is voluntary in nature, remember it only functions if the kind of consequence which is coming later is worth it. So this completes with the kind of experiment B.F. Skinner gave. Let's come to the main terminologies of reward and punishment. What is reward? Reinforcement is a tool which increases the probability of desired behavior. There are two kinds of reinforcement, positive and negative. Positive reinforcement favors the favorable outcome. For example, giving a treat to the child after the child cleans the room. So you tell them that you clean the room, which is the desired response, and after cleaning of the room, you get a candy. So the candy is something that the child likes, so he does it to get the candy. For example, if you tell, I am going to give you a vegetable soup today, clean the room. The child feels, I don't like vegetable soup, so I don't want to clean the room. So see, this is a voluntary response. If the reward is not liked by the child, the reinforcement will not take place. That's positive reinforcement. Let's move to the negative reinforcement. Negative reinforcement states that the removal of the unpleasant stimuli, like telling a child that if he or she eats all potatoes, then won't get to eat the broccoli. So, eating, consider broccoli as an unpleasant thing, and eating potato leads to the removal of the undesirable task, which is eating potato, is then negatively reinforced, which also suggests, I'll give you a better example for this, which obviously suggests that here there is no reward. There is an unpleasant stimuli. You want to get rid of the unpleasant stimuli. That's why you give the desired behavior. Like for example, whenever you go to a class, your teacher is always shouting because of the messy class, and you get scolded way too much by that teacher. You're always getting scolded. She's always being angry with you. So to get away with this unpleasant, stimuli of the noise and the shouting and the scolding, you clean your class. So as soon as you see the teacher coming, what do you voluntarily do? You clean the class. This is the desired behavior. We are getting a desired behavior, but without a reward, but getting away, escaping the unpleasant stimuli. Similar example, something that you see in your day-to-day living that you have. Like for example, you tend to wear woolen clothes because you want to control the amount of heat and shivers that fall on the body. So, what do? To make sure that you're able to take care of the cold outside, you wear winter clothes, woolen clothes. So, that is something which is negative reinforcement. Then we have positive punishment. Positive punishments, it is for removal of the bad behavior. Positive punishment means applying unpleasant event after a behavior, which is spanking of a child, for a common example as a positive punishment. And these punishment usually leads to removal of the behavior. A negative consequences directly apply to reduce the unwanted behavior, which is if you do anything wrong, to remove that unwanted behavior, we do a do a negative consequence, which is spanking, hitting, scolding. This is removal and a negative consequence. Then we have negative punishment. This is taking away something pleasant. So negative punishment is taking away something negative, positive after the behavior. So if a child fails, you tell them you are not going to spend time with the child. If a child fails, you tell them you do not go out to play for 7 days. That is taking away something positive. So that's called the negative punishment, where you take away something pleasant. Positive punishment, you want to avoid something negative. So this is how this conditioning is so different from the other one. And we all remember that operant conditioning is more applicable in the school life than the classical conditioning, because applicable conditioning, application of instrumental conditioning is good grades, getting into better colleges, scoring well, doing good behaviors, not lying, developing great behaviors. Now let's move to something which is observational learning. Observational learning is the third form of learning, which is the principle which suggests that we learn through observation of other. This was given by Albert Bandura, and unlike the operant and the classical conditioning, there is no association between stimulus and response as such. Here we make the child learn by observation of other people's behavior, which are reinforced and valued in society. So speaking of this, remember there was a very famous Bobodol experiment which was done by Albert Bandura, and observation occurred in two ways. First, direct observation. So when we talk about observation learning, observation always happens. This kind of learning takes place through direct observation or indirect observation. So direct observation, we learn observing directly the role model. Indirect observation is hearing about the role model, that this is how your seniors were, this is how your co-mates were before you. You should have been doing better than them, and your performance should be far better than your seniors. This is doing what? Making an observation, but of people who are not available with you. So this is called as indirect learning. Now let's come to the experiment, which was one of the most famous experiment of psychology, which was the Bobodol experiment that we have. Bobodol experiment was one of the classic experiments done in the field of this. Actually, Albert Bandura did this experiment to make us understand that children are actually learning a lot of violent behavior just by observation of models, observation of television and people around. So here, Bandura and his researchers showed children a video where models were acting out aggressively with an inflated bobo dolls. You know, the Chinese doll which are inflated with helium and then they come up. So they punched them, kicked them, assaulted the doll, and this was shown to another bunch of children. This was a video shown to another bunch of children. Now the video at the end has three different variations. Either of the model, first that the model of the behavior was rewarded, then the model was punished for their behavior, and the last consequences was the model was shown nothing. So after watching the behavior, researcher told that the Bobo doll was identical to the video given to the children who saw the video. Now the researcher found that the children were more likely to mimic and copy violent behavior. Why? Because in one of the set of response, they saw that the children were being rewarded for doing such and mimicking, hitting the Bobo dolls and crushing the Bobo dolls. So don't we see that the aggressive behaviors are learned by models like this? If we see aggressive cartoons, we see nonsensical cartoons, children tend to learn it by seeing that these cartoons are not dying, they're just getting up. So this is the kind of reward that they tend to have. So this completes with the observational learning, where it was observed that the model being punished for their violence showed very less violence towards the doll also. So there were two kinds of behaviors which were shown. Maximum showed violence, a little lesser showed that they did nothing because they even saw some models being punished. So remember, having a good role model is extremely important in life. We need to all have an extremely important role model so that we are able to give out good behaviors to our upcoming generation. This is that experiment which was done. That was the video that you see. The blue color thing is the video. See the next one, the second one. Did you see the children who are mimicking the real Bobo doll, hitting, punching, throwing as many things on the Bobo doll because they mimic the aggressive behaviors. Let's move to another chapter within the same unit, which is unit 3, memory. After we understood that we tend to memorize things, learn things through acquisition of classical, operant, and observational learning. We need to know once you acquire this needs to be retained in your mind, this needs to be taken care in your mind, which is to be stored and retrieved on time. So this is done through a process called memory. The mental process used to answer all our questions, the ability to retain information and reproduce it over time at the right time of performance of a cognitive task is called memory. So all information received by our senses go through these stages. For example, we first have coding. So memory does not take place haphazardly. It has some stages. So these stages are in the form of three that we talk about. The first is encoding, then is storage, and then is retrieval. Remember, all the information around the world is happening through the same process, which is you are encoding information, which is taking in information, then converting the sensory information and storing it inside within some form which is easy and applicable for you, and then retrieving it over time, which is the stored information coming back to your awareness whenever it is required to complete a cognitive task. So this is in three processes that memory information in memory goes, which is it's encoded, it is stored, and it is retrieved. I hope that becomes very simple. That's one of the most simplest method that we can have when we talk about memory. Now moving ahead, this is one of the most famous model of memory, which was called as Atkinson and Shiffrin. Atkinson and Shiffrin introduced three kinds of memory to us, which was called sensory memory, short-term memory, which is also called as working memory, and long-term memory. So he stated in this Atkinson and Shiffrin model, let's understand a lot of things together in this model first. First, we get so many information from the outside world that goes inside, which kind of memory? It's called the sensory memory. Why a sensory memory? Because sensory memory is the kind of memory which takes in information through stimulation of audition, vision, touch, taste, smell. So sensory information has retention of a lot of things. 25 to 2000 things, milliseconds, things keep coming in. Now, its duration is milliseconds, which is 1/10 of a second. It just comes in and zoop, it's gone. So if it's a flashy color that you saw, you will remember it. But a very dull color you saw in between so many things, you might not remember it. If there's a journey that you're taking from past 7 days and there's nothing exciting in the journey, you might not remember the journey. But something happens on the journey, people fighting, there's an accident, you will always remember that standpoint. So remember, it has very limited capacity, which has very limited duration, which is milliseconds. Capacity is large, 25 to 2000. Remember, if you do not look at this information for a longer duration of time, you tend to forget it. So attention is extremely important. If it's selectively attended, the information goes to the short term memory, which is also called the working memory. This memory has a retention of about 15 to 30 seconds, which is duration, and has a capacity of 7 plus minus 2. So when we say 7 plus minus 2, remember working memory is one of the most efficient memory of all time. Working memory is the memory that you have to listen to me right now. 7 plus minus 2 is the capacity, which is, I don't know if children at their young days played this game or not. We played when we were young. We had a board, a big plank board, which has approximately 10 to 15 items kept on it, like a scale, an eraser, a little a box, a pen, a pencil. And we were shown those things only for 10 to 15 seconds. And then the max children who maximally remembered the item won the game. So that's actually testing of the working memory. It has a capacity of 7 plus minus 2, which is that's the reason our mobile numbers are 10 digit, your card numbers are 4 to 7 digits, your telephone numbers of landlines were 6 to 7 digits, because our capacity duration is only 7 plus minus 2. Remember, even here, the duration is so less, which is 15 second to 30 second, if the information is not rehearsed time and again. Rehearsal takes place in two forms: elaborate rehearsals and something which is uh, maintenance rehearsal, which is repetition of information time and again. You do that, you're able to maintain it, you revise. The information will stay in the working memory and will get processed to the long term memory. Remember, if you have not rehearsed this, just read it once, it will drop down and will be lost like the image showed. And once the information goes to the long term memory is one of the most largest span, capacity, duration, stays there information over a passage of time. Maybe for some people, over time of life, it is only applicable for decay and failure, which is you might not be able to recall information as it is, or probably you're not able to retrieve information because they have been decayed. Decayed, why? Because you've not used it for a longer period of time. So this is models of memory that we talk about. So models of memory, speaking of stated a stage model. Why it's called the stage model? Because here the memory takes place in stages and it's called the stage model. Another thing, Atkinson and Shiffrin was one of the first psychologists of memory who stated that our mind is a complete comparison of our computers that we have. Why? The mind works in the same way. Do you realize today the artificial intelligence is a capacity which is given by the mind? I don't know how many of you have seen the new, product of Gmail. Write in your mailbox. That's a new thing, which is a production, which is before the AI. Artificial intelligence, it's better than the artificial intelligence. You see, your mind is capable of so much of innovation, so much of technology to break through. So remember, he compared the brain, the mind, which is the learning systems of our human body, with a computer. Why? Because we said that a memory comprises of a random access memory, which is RAM, and read-only memory. And similarly, our brain also, when we talk about our mind is also capable of understanding information through sensory working in long-term memory, which makes it capable like the computer. So this finishes the stage model and also tells us that how does information in day-to-day living is memorized in our memory systems. Three memory system: sensory, short-term, long-term. Let's move ahead. There was a principle which was called the levels of processing model, which was again claimed by this model refutes the claim of Atkinson and Shiffrin, but this was given by Kraken, Lockhart, and Tulving. They said that the systems working in the in our memory systems are incorrect. We rather have levels rather than systems. So the level of processing said that we have three kinds of levels, which has been used to encode information. So Craig and Talvin stated three levels, which was the first is the most shallowest level, which is called the structural. Then comes the phonological level where you can hear everything. So did you realize when I teach you, I also show you the text. I am speaking at the same time and explaining you, which is semantic processing, which is explanation for deeper understanding. Let's look at the example here. House structure. How does the house look like? In younger days, we made a house like a hut. That's what we talk about the shallow level. Also, it can also be a house in terms of the terms HOUSE, the structural unit. Then phoneme, the sound of the house is rhyming with a mouse, house mouse. So same cat hat. So you explain a child, write cat. Then you tell them remove the C, put a H, remove the H, put the M. So we are making better in terms of the structural pattern. Then hearing pattern, mat, hat, cat, which is house and mouse. We tell them to rhyme those terms. And then we tell them the usability of the house, that it's a place to live, it is made of brick and mortar, it's where the families are united and staying under the one roof. So that is something which is the last level. And according to Atkinson and Schifrin, it happened in systems not this way. Information was processed in sensory memory, short-term memory, and long-term memory. Whereas when we talk about Craig and Locard, it happened in three levels, which is structural, phoneme, and semantic. And the systems were not very applicable. According to them, the systems were not the right way of information processing. Let's move ahead to another content before we move is called thinking. Thinking is one of the most elaborate concept of cognitive processes. Thinking is actually the process of knowing. Thinking is called cognition. So thinking is a behavior which is often implicit, hidden, done in symbols, done in images, and thinking is defined as a problem solving process in which we use symbols and ideas in lays of overt activity. That means in order to complete those activities, overt activities, we use problem solving, we use images, symbols, etc. Remember, thinking always has to be goal directed if you want to reach towards a goal. If you do not want to reach towards a goal, remember thinking would not be of any use to us. Now let's come to some pointers of thinking. First of all, when we talk about some of the most important types, these are some of the most important kinds of thinking: perceptual and concrete, conceptual and abstract, reflective, creative, and critical. So let's continue in understanding. Speaking of perceptual and concrete, like the term suggests, it's something which is fabricatedly very, very dominant and concrete. It has a proper structure, it has a proper perception. When we talk about a term called a book, you look and think of a book, of a page, of a computer. You look at a computer, there's an image which is forming. So it's a perceptual and concrete figure also, which is called as perceptual or concrete thinking. Then we come to something which is conceptual or abstract thinking. This is one of the most superior kind of thinking to perception, because here we are able to use concepts, symbols, abstract the ideas from the symbols and then put up in our thinking. This thinking is usually used for problem solving, which is these are those concepts which are superior in nature. You use different symbols and different ideas, collaboration of ideas to form a thinking. So that's why it's abstract. It could be vague at times. It is far more superior and creative than perceptual thinking. Then we have something which is reflective. Reflective is based on insight, complete insight, which is sudden aha feeling that you have through experiences. Oh, there's a solution suddenly, which is an insight evolving, the illumination part. Then we have creative thinking. Creative thinking is creation of novel, new, original ideas, which is unique and novel, and it allows rearranging of stimuli to produce it in a new way. Then we have critical thinking, one of the most important thinking to have. It involves making seasoned judgment and examining assumptions, which allows you to, when we talk about critical thinking, it allows you to make correct judgment, being able to assume rightly and use those assumptions to solve problems. Again, a very high level of thinking in comparison to perceptual thinking is critical thinking. Our exams also ask for critical analysis of a topic, which means making correct assumptions and making the right judgment of what that topic actually assumes to tell you. Then let's move to the 3.8 process, which is under thinking. That thinking takes place to mental imagery, concepts, and proposition. Let's understand and define them, all the three parts that we have. And then we will move to the last unit that we have, which is called as emotions. Now, when we come to the last part of this topic, imagine, let's connect the dots and understand what were we talking in the unit 3. We spoke of perception because perception is the first thing that comes to us in terms of sensory feelings, sensory images, sound, taste, touch. Once you sense it, you perceive it, which is interpreted why this sound, taste, touch is coming to me. That is perception. Once you understand it, you want to learn it so that you can keep that learning, that acquisition, that skill with you over time. So that took us to another form of another form of process, which was called as the learning process. Learning happened in three ways. We do it through classical conditioning, which is conditioning by others, completely involuntary. Then we do it by operant conditioning. This is the kind of learning that happens to you voluntarily, which is that you do it on your own. So when I say when you do it on your own, that means you will pick up a voluntary consequence only if you want an SR consequence formations to happen, which is instrumental. And the last was the observational learning. Observational learning is one of the most important learning. It happens in approximately 60 to 7 percentage of your time in an entire day. You look at people, observe people, see if they're being rewarded or not, and that further takes it to the next thing, which is further takes it to the next level, which is memorization. When we speak about memorization, remember memorization is the ultimate thing that an entire individual is working for. We are working for recalling the learned skill, being able to use the learned skill at the right time across the situation and time. So when we talk about memory, memory is one of those that helps in retaining information, retaining the store, retaining the information, store the information, and recall at the right time. Its main feature is retention, storage, and recall. One of the most important aspects of memory. Memory has stated us two models. One was with the Atkinson stage model, which talks about three systems of memory: sensory, short term, which was also called as the working memory, and the long term memory. And then we came to something which was called as the levels of processing by Craig and Lockhart, who discarded the idea of stage model and said that the memory and memorization happens through levels of processing rather than systems that we talk about. Then we came to the last part, which was thinking, which is goal directed, the different kind of thinking. And let's say how does thinking is utilized in what forms. So now, as soon as we hear something, there's a propositional thought which is made. Propositional thought was the first one. As soon as you think of something, an image is made, which is concrete and propositional. So sentence such as one should not waste water or black is a beautiful color, you see that color as soon as you say black is a beautiful color, imagine the color. You say red and green is my favorite, imagine you start assuming those colors. So that propositional thought comes into play. Remember, thinking happens mostly through mental imagery, which is this. So mental imagery is as soon as you say something, there's an image which is formed on the top of your vision, which is as soon as you make that, think of that sentence, there's an image formed, which is called as mental imagery and also as propositional thought. Then there's another mode is which is called the visual or the imaginal thought, which is the type that we see in our mind. So not having the glimpse that we hear, but now you see the entire, the entire series of event as you state that thought, which is called the visual thought. Like, I think I can run faster than him when I get into the relay races. You see that entire vision of yourself running, preceding the others, going at first, running faster than the others. So that's what is an complete visionary thought which is there. Whereas when we say of hearing, it is just one image. This is an entire activity which is visualized, which is called as the the imaginal thought in comparison to the propositional thought. Propositional thought is the first one, then is the imaginal and the visionary thought, which uses both concepts and propositions, which is use words, terminologies, ideas, and symbol. This finishes with thinking and the types of thinking. Let's move to the unit 4 now. Unit 4 will talk about affective processes, which is going to talk about motivation and emotion. We will start with something which is motivation and emotion. Let's understand why these two terms usually when I don't know if you all have studied psychology before graduation, you might have heard motivation and emotion as a chapter also coming together. Why did it happen that these chapters always belong together? I'll tell you why. Motivation is the drive, that urge. The term, the drive, the urge, the motive, working to make you move. Emotions are feelings in motion. Remember, the final product of both the terminology is motion, which is making you move by the end. So when we talk about motivation, these are urges, drives, and your motives that will make you move, complete a task, make you solve a problem. And when we talk about emotions, these would be feeling. These would be those um temporary affect, or probably those feelings that will make you move. Being happy will make you move and do something. Being angry make us do so many wrong things. So definition of motivation, which is 4.2 of the unit. Motivation always refers to a complex reactions consisting of first physiological responses. Always remember, motivation not only is psychological but also physiological. How? When we talk about motivation, motivations are also urge and drives. So when we talk about urge and drives, whenever you're very excited, remember there's a heart pounding, your blood pressure going up, your you sweating, palpitating because you're very excited. You're very excited to do something, which is called as physiological responses. So we know that motivation also has a connect, which is physiological in nature. Then the subjective feeling. Remember, motivation also consumes reactions which are subjective in nature. There could be times when your motives leads to a very happy feeling, disgusting feeling, sorrow feeling, maybe anger at times, maybe disappointment also at some point of time. Then we move to another reaction which motivation gives us, which is very expressive, which is facial expression, the smile, the sorrow, the sadness, the dullness in the mind, which are the three parts of motivation, which is physiological responses consist of. So motivation is complex in reaction. It gives you physiological, it gives you psychological, which is subjective in nature, and also facial, which is emotional and expressive in nature. So that finishes with motivation. Let's define motivation in a very concrete term. This was given by Morgan et al. In 1993. You can also check it out if you have the book. The driving and the pulling force which results in persistent behavior directed towards particular goal. So remember, why are we motivated? Our behavior is always goal directed. We just learned it. So when thinking and behavior is goal directed, always remember, when we are motivated to achieve a goal, motivated to do something, that driving pulling force leads to persistent behavior that could be directed towards goals. So that is called as motivation. Then let's understand some terminologies which go similar and hand in hand to motivation, which is needs, drives, and incentives. So as I said, we have needs, urges, drives, which are similar to motivation. That's what makes you move. See, needs is a biological state of a cellular body where there's a deficiency. For example, hunger deficiency, water, thirst, oxygen. This is all deficiency. It's a need, needs to be completed. You are motivated to do it. Drive. Drive by Feast and Rosenberg was stated that it's the perceived state of tension that occurs when your body is deficient of something. So need will lead to the drive, because when there is a deficiency of a need, it will make you drive towards. It will create a tension for you to do something, and then once you do that, there is an external state or coming from the environment which is called as incentives. As soon as the drive is complete and you do something, that leads to something which is incentives. It is motivating to yourself, like ran so hard and now suddenly gets an amazing fruity drink to drink. That is called an incentive that you get after a need and a drive being completed. So then we talk about the types of motivation quickly. There are two kinds, primary and secondary. Primary is basic in need, secondary, which is coming from the outside things, which could be different from individual to individual. Then we talk about extrinsic motivation, motivation coming from outside, which is giving a pat on the back, external reward, and then there's internal intrinsic motivation, which is you being determined, courage, and to do complete your task, your own courage to do it. You do not require any support doing it alone. Do find out which is your type of motivation, which completes this, which is the intrinsic motivation. Challenge, joy, and mastery. So we will continue from here, identifying your type of motivation of Unit 4. Hope there was an understanding of the content. Thank you.
Yes. Today, వివిధ ఆర్థిక వ్యవస్థల యొక్క నిర్మాణాత్మకమైనటువంటి మార్పులు ఏమైనా ఉంటాయా? అంటే సాధారణంగా ప్రపంచంలోని దేశాలన్నింటినీ సాంప్రదాయ అర్థశాస్త్రవేత్తల ప్రకారం 3 రకాలుగా వర్గీకరించారు. ఒకటి అభివృద్ధి చెందిన దేశాలు అని, 2 అభివృద్ధి చెందుతున్న దేశాలు అని, వెనుకబడిన దేశాలు అని. ఈ వెనుకబడిన దేశాలని 3వ ప్రపంచ దేశాలని కూడా పిలుస్తూ ఉంటారు. మరి అభివృద్ధి చెందిన దేశాలు అని ఏ బేస్ మీద మనం పిలుస్తున్నాం అంటే ఎక్కువ తలసరి ఆదాయం, ఎక్కువ జాతీయ ఆదాయం, హెచ్చు పారిశ్రామిక రంగాల అభివృద్ధి, ఎక్కువ మూలధనం, పెట్టుబడి, వినియోగం, వినిమయం, డిమాండ్, ఇవన్నీ కూడా. మరి వెనుకబడిన దేశాలు అని 3వ ప్రపంచ దేశాలని వేటిని మనం పిలుస్తాం అంటే ఇక్కడ ఎక్కువ పేదరికం, ఎక్కువ నిరుద్యోగం, ఎక్కువ ఆదాయ అసమానతలు. ఇట్ మీన్స్ దే ఆర్ ఫైట్ ఫర్ బేసిక్ నీడ్స్. అంటే వాళ్ళు నిత్యం కూడా వాళ్ళ యొక్క 3 పూటల భోజనం కోసమే వాళ్ళు ఫైట్ చేస్తుంటారు, స్ట్రగుల్ చేస్తుంటారు. ఈ దేశాలని సాధారణంగా 3వ ప్రపంచ దేశాలు అని, వెనుకబడిన దేశాలు అని పిలవడం జరుగుతుంది. అట్లాగే మరి అభివృద్ధి చెందుతున్న దేశాలు అంటే ఎగ్జాంపుల్ ఇండియా. అయితే ఇది సాంప్రదాయకమైనటువంటి అర్థశాస్త్రవేత్తల యొక్క ఒపీనియన్, వాళ్ళ యొక్క అభిప్రాయం ప్రకారం. కానీ ఆధునిక అర్థశాస్త్రవేత్తలు లేదు, అసలు 3వ ప్రపంచ దేశాలు అనేటివి వెనుకబడిన దేశాలు అనేవి ఏ దేశాలు లేవు. ఇప్పుడు అన్ని దేశాలు కూడా అభివృద్ధి చెందుతున్న దేశాల కోవలోకి వస్తాయి. కారణం ఆయా దేశాలు నిరంతరం రోజు రోజుకి ఇయర్ బై ఇయర్ అవి వాటి యొక్క తలసరి ఆదాయ అవస్థాపన పెట్టుబడులని, సాంఘిక ఆర్థిక పరమైనటువంటి అవస్థాపన పెట్టుబడులని అవి పెంచుకుంటూ మరి అవి అభివృద్ధి వైపు ప్రయాణం చేస్తున్నాయి. కాబట్టి ఇక్కడ 3వ ప్రపంచ దేశాలు అని లేవు, ఉండకూడదు, పిలవకూడదు అని ఆధునిక అర్థశాస్త్రవేత్తలు అభిప్రాయపడ్డారు. అంటే ఇప్పుడు ఈ ఆధునిక యుగంలో కూడా ప్రపంచ దేశాలని మనం 2 రకాలుగా మాత్రమే చూడవచ్చు. ఒకటి అభివృద్ధి చెందిన దేశాలు, రెండవది అభివృద్ధి చెందుతున్న దేశాలు అని. అంటే ఇంకా 3వ ప్రపంచ దేశాలని కానీ, లేదా వెనుకబడిన దేశాలని కానీ, లేదా ఇంకా అల్ప ఆదాయ దేశాలని కానీ పిలవడానికి అవకాశం లేదు. అంటే ఇక 2 దేశాలు, ఒకటి అభివృద్ధి చెందుతున్న దేశాలు, 2 అభివృద్ధి చెందిన దేశాలు. అభివృద్ధి చెందిన దేశాలకు ఉదాహరణ యుఎస్ఏ, యూకే, జపాన్, జర్మనీ. అభివృద్ధి చెందుతున్న దేశాలకి ఉదాహరణ ఇండియా, శ్రీలంక, నేపాల్, భూటాన్, ఎక్సెట్రా. ఈ దేశాలని మనం అభివృద్ధి చెందుతున్న దేశాలని పిలవచ్చు. మరి అభివృద్ధి చెందిన దేశాలకి, అభివృద్ధి చెందుతున్న దేశాలకి ఏమైనా చేంజెస్ ఉంటాయా, ఏమైనా డిఫరెన్సెస్ ఉంటాయా అంటే అభివృద్ధి చెందుతున్న దేశాలన్నీ కూడా వ్యవసాయ ఆధారిత దేశాలు. అంటే వ్యవసాయ రంగమే అత్యధిక ప్రాధాన్యతలో కలిగినటువంటి రంగం. వ్యవసాయ రంగమే ఇక్కడ కీలకమైనటువంటి భూమికను పోషిస్తుంది. వ్యవసాయ రంగమే మిగిలిన రంగాల కంటే మిగిలిన రంగాల పైన డామినేట్ చేస్తుంది. అంటే ఇక్కడ పారిశ్రామిక రంగం కావచ్చు, సేవల రంగం కావచ్చు. అంటే పారిశ్రామిక సేవల రంగాల కంటే వ్యవసాయ రంగమే ఇక్కడ డామినెంట్ రోల్ ప్లే చేస్తుంది అభివృద్ధి చెందుతున్నటువంటి దేశాలను. అంతేకాకుండా అధిక జనాభా వృద్ధి రేటు కలిగినటువంటిది ఇక్కడ అనదర్ క్యారెక్టర్. మరొక లక్షణం ఏంటిది అంటే అధిక జనాభా వృద్ధి రేటు కలిగి ఉండాలి. వ్యవసాయ రంగమే ప్రాథమిక రంగంగా కలిగి ఉంటుంది. ఇక రెండవది అభివృద్ధి చెందిన దేశాలు. మరి అభివృద్ధి చెందిన దేశాలకు ఉదాహరణ యుఎస్ఏ, యూకే, జపాన్, జర్మనీ, ఇంకా ఆస్ట్రేలియా, కెనడా, ఇంకా దోస్ కంట్రీస్, రష్యా కావచ్చు. ఈ దేశాలన్నీ కూడా అభివృద్ధి చెందిన దేశాలు. మరి అభివృద్ధి చెందిన దేశాలలో పారిశ్రామిక రంగమే కీలకమైనటువంటి భూమికను పోషిస్తుంది. అందుకే ఈ కంట్రీస్కి మరొక పేరేంటిది అంటే ఇండస్ట్రియలైజ్డ్ కంట్రీస్. మరి వాట్ అబౌట్ డెవలపింగ్ కంట్రీస్? అభివృద్ధి చెందుతున్న దేశాలకి ఉదాహరణ అగ్రేరియన్ కంట్రీస్, వ్యవసాయ ఆధారిత దేశాలు. మరి అభివృద్ధి చెందిన దేశాలు పారిశ్రామికీకరణ చెందిన దేశాలు, ఇండస్ట్రియలైజ్డ్ కంట్రీస్. అంటే పారిశ్రామిక రంగమే అధిక ప్రాధాన్యత కలిగి ఉంటుంది. ಹೆಚ್ಚು జనాభా కూడా పారిశ్రామిక రంగంపైనే పనిచేస్తూ ఉంటారు. పారిశ్రామిక రంగమే కీలకమైనటువంటి భూమికను పోషిస్తూ ఉంటుంది. అంటే సాధారణంగా అభివృద్ధి చెందిన దేశాలలో తక్కువ జనాభా వృద్ధి రేటు ఉంటుంది. జనాభా వృద్ధి రేటు అల్పంగా ఉంటుంది. ఆల్మోస్ట్ అభివృద్ధి చెందిన దేశాలలో ఎలా చెప్పుకోవచ్చు అంటే జననాల రేటు అన్నది మరణాల రేటుకు ఈక్వల్గా ఉంటుంది అంతే. ఇట్ మీన్స్ దెర్ ఇస్ నో గ్రోత్ రేట్. అంటే ఇంత సమతుల్య స్థాయి జనాభాలో కనిపిస్తూ ఉంటుంది. మరి పారిశ్రామికీకరణ చెందినప్పటికీ ఇక్కడ పేదరికం కానీ నిరుద్యోగం కానీ ఉండవా అంటే ఉంటాయి, కానీ చాలా అల్ప స్థాయిలో ఉంటాయి చూడవచ్చు, చెప్పుకోవచ్చు. కానీ అదే అభివృద్ధి చెందుతున్న దేశాలలో అలా కాదు. మరి పేదరికం, నిరుద్యోగం, ఆదాయ అసమానతలు, ప్రాంతీయ అసమానతలు, ఇంకా ఇన్ వేరియస్ డిస్క్రిమినేషన్స్ in different sectors. ఇక్కడ కొద్దిగా ఒక మాటలో చెప్పాలి అంటే కరప్షన్ కూడా అధికంగానే ఉంటుంది అని చెప్పొచ్చు. ఎందుకంటే ఇక్కడ అక్షరాస్యత తక్కువగా ఉంటుంది కాబట్టి, క్వశ్చనింగ్ ప్రశ్నించేటువంటి తత్వం తక్కువగా ఉంటుంది కాబట్టి రాజకీయ నాయకులు కూడా మరి అందిన కాడికి దోచుకోవడానికి కూడా అవకాశం అనేది ఎక్కువగా ఉంటుంది అభివృద్ధి చెందుతున్నటువంటి దేశాలలో. ఇవన్నీ కూడా డిఫరెన్సెస్ అభివృద్ధి చెందిన దేశాలకు, అభివృద్ధి చెందుతున్న దేశాలకు. మరి ఈ అభివృద్ధి చెందిన దేశమైనా, అభివృద్ధి చెందుతున్న దేశమైనా, సాధారణంగా అభివృద్ధి చెందిన దేశమైనా, అభివృద్ధి చెందుతున్న దేశమైనా 3 రంగాలు ప్రాథమికంగా మనకు కనిపిస్తాయి. ఈ 3 రంగాలే కీలకమైనటువంటి భూమికను పోషిస్తాయి. మరి ఏ రంగాలవి? వ్యవసాయ రంగం, పారిశ్రామిక రంగం, సేవల రంగం. వ్యవసాయ రంగం, పారిశ్రామిక రంగం, సేవల రంగం. అంటే ఈ 3 రంగాలు మొత్తం ఆర్థిక వ్యవస్థకి విస్తరించుకుంటుంది. ఈ 3 రంగాలలోనే మొత్తం ఆర్థిక వ్యవస్థ విస్తరించుకుంటుంది. ఇక ఈ 3 రంగాలు అభివృద్ధి చెందిన దేశాలలో ఉంటాయి, అభివృద్ధి చెందుతున్నటువంటి దేశాలలో ఉంటాయి. కానీ పారిశ్రామిక రంగం ఏమో డామినెంట్ రోల్ ప్లే చేస్తుంది అభివృద్ధి చెందిన దేశాలలో, వ్యవసాయ రంగం ఏమో డామినెంట్ రోల్ ప్లే చేస్తుంది అభివృద్ధి చెందుతున్నటువంటి దేశంలో. ఇక్కడ ఇది మనకు చిన్న ఎగ్జాంపుల్. మరి దేనిని వ్యవసాయ రంగం అంటారు? అసలు వ్యవసాయ రంగం అంటే ఏంటి తెలుసా? వ్యవసాయ రంగాన్ని ప్రాథమిక రంగం అంటారు. మరి వ్యవసాయం, పశుపోషణ, పట్టు, అడవులు, ఆ తర్వాత కోళ్ళ పెంపకం, చేపల పెంపకం, ఇంకా సాధారణంగా అల్లియడ్ యాక్టివిటీస్, అగ్రికల్చర్ అల్లియడ్ యాక్టివిటీస్ అన్నీ కూడా అగ్రికల్చర్ సెక్టర్, అనిమల్ హస్బెండరీస్, ఫారెస్ట్రీ, ఫిషింగ్, మైనింగ్, క్వారింగ్, పౌల్ట్రీ, ఫిషింగ్, ఇవన్నీ కూడా వ్యవసాయ రంగంలో చూస్తూ ఉంటాం. మరి వ్యవసాయ రంగంలో జనాభా ఏదిగా ఏ ఇక్కడ మనకు చాలా క్లియర్గా కనిపిస్తుంది. సాధారణంగా అభివృద్ధి చెందిన దేశాల్లో 1% నుండి 7% జనాభా మాత్రమే, 1% నుండి 7% జనాభా మాత్రమే అభివృద్ధి చెందిన దేశాలలో వ్యవసాయ రంగం పైన ఆధారపడి ఉంటుంది. కానీ మరి అలాంటి దేశాలలో దాదాపుగా 2/3 according to 2021, 22, 23, around 51-52% is in population directly or indirectly depends on agriculture sector. So what about the developed countries? Example, USA, UK, Japan, Germany. Those countries are 1%, 2%, 3%, 4% population directly depends on agriculture only. But India and other developing countries, around 2/3 population, above 50% population directly or indirectly depends on agriculture sector. So the another important thing is జాతీయ ఆదాయం. మరి జాతీయ ఆదాయం అనేది ఎలా ఉంటుంది వ్యవసాయ రంగం పైన? అభివృద్ధి చెందిన దేశాలలో అంటే 1% నుండి 15% వరకు ఉంటుంది. 1% నుండి 15% వరకే మాత్రమే ఉంటుంది సాధారణంగా. కానీ అభివృద్ధి చెందుతున్నటువంటి దేశాలలో చాలా డిఫరెంట్గా మనం చూడవచ్చు. ఎలా డిఫరెంట్గా అంటే సుమారుగా 1951లో 54%, 54% 17% to 18% population depends on industrial sector in 1950-51. Then it is going to increases. It is going to increases around 27% in 2020-21 period. So this is called the particularly the industrial sector, the gross domestic product, and dependent working population is going to decline. It is the most complicated issue. But at the same time, agriculture sector, working population and GDP is declined. It is the indication of economic development. అంటే వ్యవసాయ రంగంలో పనిచేస్తున్నటువంటి శ్రామికులు తగ్గుతూ వ్యవసాయ రంగంలో నుండి వచ్చేటువంటి జీడిపి కూడా క్రమంగా తగ్గుతుంది. వ్యవసాయ రంగం యొక్క గ్రోత్ ఉంటే వ్యవసాయేతర రంగాల యొక్క జనాభా పెరిగినప్పుడే వ్యవసాయ రంగం తగ్గుతూ వస్తుంది అని మనం ఇక్కడ భావించాలి. ఇట్లా క్రమక్రమంగా పెరుగుతూ వచ్చింది. ఆ తర్వాత అభివృద్ధి చెందుతున్నటువంటి దేశాలలో తక్కువ శాతం జనాభా పారిశ్రామిక రంగం పైన ఆధారపడితే అభివృద్ధి చెందిన దేశాలలో ఎక్కువ శాతం జనాభా పారిశ్రామిక రంగం పైన ఆధారపడుతుంది. అంతేకాకుండా ఎక్కువ శాతం గ్రాస్ డొమెస్టిక్ ప్రొడక్ట్ పారిశ్రామిక రంగం నుండి వస్తే మరి అభివృద్ధి చెందుతున్నటువంటి దేశాలలో చాలా తక్కువ పర్సెంటేజీ పారిశ్రామిక రంగం నుండి వస్తుంది. ఇది కొంత స్టాటిస్టికల్గా కొంత ఇబ్బంది కనిపించినా కూడా ఇది ఒరిజినల్ ఫ్యాక్ట్. ఆ తర్వాత సేవల రంగం. మరి సేవల రంగం అంటే ఏంటిది అసలు? మరి సేవల రంగానికి మరొక పేరు బూస్ట్ సెక్టార్ అంటారు. బూస్ట్ సెక్టర్ ఎందుకు ఇట్లా పిలుస్తాం అంటే వ్యవసాయ రంగం ఏం చేస్తుంది అంటే పారిశ్రామిక సేవల రంగాలకి అవసరమైనటువంటి పారిశ్రామిక సేవల రంగాల అభివృద్ధికి కావలసినటువంటి అవస్థాపన సౌకర్యాలను ప్రొవైడ్ చేస్తుంది, అందిస్తుంది సేవల రంగం. సేవల రంగాన్ని సర్వీస్ సెక్టార్ని టెరిటరీ సెక్టార్ అని కూడా అంటారు, తృతీయ రంగం అని కూడా అంటారు. ఈ విధంగా మరి సేవల రంగానికి అన్ని దేశాలలో కూడా ఇటు అభివృద్ధి చెందిన దేశాలలో అభివృద్ధి చెందుతున్న దేశాలలో కూడా అత్యధిక ప్రాధాన్యత ఉంటుంది. ఎందుకోసం ఇక్కడ ఈ విషయం మాట్లాడుకుంటున్నామంటే ఇటు పారిశ్రామిక రంగ అభివృద్ధి అయినా అటు సేవల వ్యవసాయ రంగ అంటే సేవల రంగం అంటే ఏంటి అసలు? తృతీయ రంగం ఏంటి? మరి దేని టెరిటరీ సెక్టర్ అని అంటారు. అంటే సాధారణంగా రోడ్డు, ట్రాన్స్పోర్ట్, కమ్యూనికేషన్, బ్యాంకింగ్, ఇన్సూరెన్స్, ఫైనాన్స్, హెల్త్, ఎడ్యుకేషన్, రైల్వేస్, పోస్టల్స్ అండర్ సర్వీస్ సెక్టర్. These factors దీని అవస్థాపన సౌకర్యాన్ని కూడా అంటారు వీటిని. అంతేకాకుండా ఈ రంగాలలో ఈ కార్యకలాపాలలో మరి పనిచేసేటువంటి శ్రామిక జనాభా కూడా ಹೆಚ್ಚು తలసరి ఆదాయం కలిగి ఉంటారు. మనం సేవల రంగానికి వచ్చేసినప్పుడు రియల్ ఎస్టేట్ లో కూడా సేవల రంగం కిందనే చూస్తూ ఉంటాం. ఇవన్నీ కూడా హోటల్స్ కావచ్చు, ధాబాస్ కావచ్చు, రెస్టారెంట్ కావచ్చు, ఇవన్నీ కూడా మనం సుమారు దాదాపుగా సేవల రంగ అభివృద్ధిలో భాగంగానే చూస్తూ ఉంటాం. హెల్త్, ఎడ్యుకేషన్ సెక్టర్ కావచ్చు. అని కూడా ఈరోజు కార్పొరేట్ వ్యవస్థ ఎలా ఉంది అనేది మనం గమనిస్తున్నాం. ఏది ఏమైనా సేవల రంగాన్ని తృతీయ రంగం అంటారు. దీన్ని టెరిటరీ సెక్టర్ అని కూడా పిలుస్తారు. మరి తృతీయ రంగ అభివృద్ధి ఎలా జరుగుతుంది అంటే వ్యవసాయ రంగ మిగులు నుండి పారిశ్రామిక రంగ అభివృద్ధి జరిగితే పారిశ్రామిక మిగులు నుండి సేవల రంగ అభివృద్ధి జరుగుతుంది. ఇక్కడ మనం గుర్తుపెట్టుకోవాల్సింది ఇంటర్ లింక్ పెట్టింది అగ్రికల్చర్, ఇండస్ట్రీస్ అండ్ సర్వీసెస్. మరి సేవల రంగం పైన దాదాపుగా 1950-51లో 30% గ్రాస్ డొమెస్టిక్ ప్రొడక్ట్ శాతం 30% ఇక్కడ నుంచి 30.3% received GDP from service sector in 1950-51. It is going to increases around 54%, around 55%, 54.3%, around 55% GDP from service sector only. From service sector only. So it is slowly increases. Slowly increases. In 1950-51, 30.3%. In 1960-61, 30.8%. In 1970, 33.8%. ఇక్కడికి ఒక 3% ఇంక్రీజ్. ఆ తర్వాత in 1981, it is going to increase 38. In 1991, it is increases 42. Then it is in 2001, 50.4%. In 2011, 57%. In 2012, 51%. In 2020-21, that is around 55%. So, service sector is the boosting sector. It provides services to the industrial development and agriculture development. So, what about the agriculture sector, industry sector, service sector? వ్యవసాయ రంగాన్ని ప్రాథమిక రంగం, పారిశ్రామిక రంగాన్ని ద్వితీయ రంగం అన్నాం, సేవల రంగాన్ని తృతీయ రంగం అన్నాం. దీనిని బూస్టింగ్ సెక్టర్ కూడా పిలుస్తుంది. మరి ఇక్కడ సేవల రంగంలో పనిచేసేటువంటి శ్రామికుల సంఖ్య దాదాపుగా 32%, around 33% in 2020-21-22 census. GDP in around 55%. పారిశ్రామిక సేవల రంగాలు అన్నవి ఇక్కడ ఏ రంగాలుగా పిలుస్తున్నాము అంటే వ్యవసాయేతర రంగాలుగా పిలుస్తూ వస్తున్నాం. వ్యవసాయేతర రంగాలుగా పిలుస్తూ వస్తున్నాం అంటే వ్యవసాయేతర రంగాలకి ప్రాధాన్యత చాలా ఉంది అభివృద్ధి చెందిన దేశాలలో. మరి అభివృద్ధి చెందుతున్న దేశాలలో పారిశ్రామిక రంగాలకు లేదా ఉంది, కానీ ఇక్కడ కంపేర్ చేస్తున్నప్పుడు వ్యవసాయ రంగానికి అత్యధిక ప్రాధాన్యత ఇవ్వడం జరుగుతుంది మనలాంటి అభివృద్ధి చెందుతున్న దేశాలలో. అంతేకాకుండా మరి మనకి దాదాపుగా గ్రోత్ రేట్స్ అన్నవి ఎలా ఉన్నవి జాతీయ ఆదాయంలో, మరి వృద్ధి రేటు అన్నది 1951 నుండి దాదాపుగా 2021 వరకు కూడా ఏ విధంగా వృద్ధి రేటు అన్నది పెరుగుతూ వచ్చింది, లేదా ప్రణాళిక కాలంలో కూడా వృద్ధి రేటు అన్నది ఎలా ఉంది. మనం ఇప్పటి వరకు దాదాపుగా 11 పంచవర్ష ప్రణాళికలను పూర్తిగా కంప్లీట్ చేసుకున్నాం. 1951లో మొదటి పంచవర్ష ప్రణాళిక స్టార్ట్ అయింది, 56లో ఎండ్ అయిపోయింది. తిరిగి 2007లో 11వ పంచవర్ష ప్రణాళికను స్టార్ట్ చేస్తున్నాం. 2012లో 11వ పంచవర్ష ప్రణాళిక పూర్తి చేసుకున్నాం. తిరిగి 2012లో 12వ ప్రణాళికని ఏర్పాటు చేసుకొని 2017లో దాన్ని ముగించుకోవడం జరిగింది. అంటే అట్లా క్రమక్రమంగా ఒక రంగం నుండి మరొక రంగానికి, ఒక రంగం నుండి మరొక రంగానికి వృత్తి ఫలాలు ఉన్నవి మారుతూ వచ్చినప్పటికీ టార్గెట్ కానీ అచీవ్మెంట్ కానీ ఏ విధంగా ఉంది, మనం ఎటువంటి టార్గెట్ని పెట్టుకున్నాం, ఏ విధంగా మనం అచీవ్మెంట్ సాధించాం, పర్టికులర్గా గ్రోత్ రేటు అనుకున్నప్పుడు 1951-56 మొదటి ప్రణాళిక కాలంలో 4.5% ఉంది. అది క్రమంగా మన అచీవ్మెంట్ సాధించింది ఎంత అంటే 4.6%. మరి ఈ 2.1% ఏంటిది అసలు అంటే 1951లో 2.1% అని టార్గెట్ పెట్టుకున్నాం, కానీ సాధించింది ఎంత 4.6%. కాబట్టి ఈ ప్రణాళిక మొదటి పంచవర్ష ప్రణాళిక మరొక ఏంటంటే సక్సెస్ ప్లాన్ కూడా పిలుస్తుంటాం, విజయవంతమైనటువంటి ప్రణాళిక. ఆ తర్వాత గోల్డ్ ప్లాన్ అని రెండో ప్రణాళిక అంటే రెండవ వచ్చేసి ప్రణాళిక దేనికి ప్రాధాన్యత ఇచ్చింది అంటే పారిశ్రామిక అంతేకాకుండా మరి అభివృద్ధి చెందినటువంటి దేశాలలో ఇంకా ఏమైనా ఇంకా డిఫరెన్సెస్ ఉన్నాయంటే ఉంటాయి. కానీ ఇది మన దేశానికి వచ్చేసరికి దాదాపు 1950-51 నుండి 2021 వరకు కూడా వృద్ధి రేట్లు చాలా చాలా క్రమంగా గ్రోత్ రేట్ను సాధిస్తూ వచ్చిన వృద్ధి రేట్లు సక్సెస్ఫుల్ సాధించుకున్నాం. మరి పాయింట్ 7% పెట్టుకున్నాం, కానీ చాలా అచీవ్మెంట్ సాధించింది ఎంత అంటే 3.3%. ఆ తర్వాత 4వ పంచవర్ష ప్రణాళిక 69-74 పంచవర్ష ప్రణాళిక ఏర్పాటు చేసుకున్నాం. మరి ఈ కాలంలో 69-74లో దాదాపుగా 5.7% టార్గెట్ తీసుకున్నాం, కానీ 3.0% ఇక్కడ సక్సెస్ సాధించడం. ఆ తర్వాత 1974-79 ఇది 5వ పంచవర్ష ప్రణాళిక. ఇక్కడ నుంచి ఈ 4-5 పంచవర్ష ప్రణాళికల నుంచి మనకు ఇందిరాగాంధీ ఒక స్లోగన్ తీసుకొస్తుంది, గరీబీ హఠావో 20 సూత్రాల ప్రకారం మినిమం నీడ్స్ ప్రోగ్రామ్. అంటే ఈ ప్రోగ్రామ్స్ యొక్క ముఖ్య ఉద్దేశం ఈ గరీబీ హఠావో అంటే పేదరికమా పారిపో అనేటువంటి ఒక స్లోగన్ తీసుకొస్తుంది అయ్యా ఈ 4-5 ప్రణాళిక. అంటే ఎప్పుడైతే అభివృద్ధి చెందినటువంటి దేశాలు అంతేకాకుండా మనం లాస్ట్ క్లాస్లో కూడా ఒక మాట చెప్పుకున్నాం, అభివృద్ధి చెందిన దేశాలు, అభివృద్ధి చెందుతున్న దేశాలు నిజానికి కూడా అంతర్జాతీయ వ్యాపారంలో కూడా పాల్గొన్నప్పుడు లాస్ట్ క్లాస్ లో మాట్లాడుకున్నాం, గుర్తుపెట్టుకోవాలి. అదే అంశాన్ని ఇప్పుడు మళ్ళీ ఒకసారి మనం రిపీట్ చేసుకుంటున్నాం. ఏంటది? అంతర్జాతీయ వ్యాపారంలో కూడా అభివృద్ధి చెందిన దేశం, అభివృద్ధి చెందుతున్న దేశం 2 దేశాలు కలిసి వ్యవహారాలు నిర్వహిస్తున్నప్పుడు అనుకోకుండానే సంపద అభివృద్ధి చెందిన దేశానికి తరలిపోతుంది. ఇది అభివృద్ధి చెందిన దేశం కావాలని చేస్తున్న పని కాదు, అనుకోకుండా జరుగుతుంది అని ఆధునిక అర్థశాస్త్రవేత్తలు వ్యాఖ్యానించారు. అంతేకాకుండా ఆ తర్వాత 5వ పంచవర్ష ప్రణాళిక 74 నుంచి 79కి 4.4% టార్గెట్ తీసుకున్నాం. 5.0% ఇంటర్నెట్ డెవలప్మెంట్ సాధించాం. ఆ తర్వాత 6వ పంచవర్ష ప్రణాళిక 80 నుండి 85. అంటే ఈ కాలంలో కూడా వృద్ధి రేటు అన్నది మరి 4.4% నుంచి 5.0కి చేరుకుంది. ఆ తర్వాత 7వ పంచవర్ష ప్రణాళిక, మరి 7వ పంచవర్ష ప్రణాళిక కాలంలో కూడా టార్గెట్ ఎంత తీసుకున్నామంటే 5.2% తీసుకున్నాం. సాధించింది ఎంత అంటే 5.3% సాధించినాం. ఆ తర్వాత 7వ పంచవర్ష ప్రణాళిక కాలంలో 85-90 కాలం 55.0% టార్గెట్ తీసుకున్నాం. మరి 5.8% టార్గెట్ తీసుకుని మనం అచీవ్మెంట్ 5.0% టార్గెట్ తీసుకొని సాధించింది ఏంటంటే 5.8%. ఆ తర్వాత 8వ పంచవర్ష ప్రణాళిక 92 నుండి 97కి, అంటే ఇక్కడ కొన్ని వార్షిక ప్రణాళికలు కూడా తీసుకోవడం జరిగింది. ఎందుకు వార్షిక ప్రణాళికలు తీసుకున్నాం అంటే 3వ పంచవర్ష ప్రణాళిక తర్వాత 3 వార్షిక ప్రణాళికలు తీసుకున్నాం. ఆ తర్వాత 79-80 మధ్య కాలంలో మళ్ళీ ఒక 2 పంచవర్ష ప్రణాళికలు తీసుకున్నాం. ఒక పంచవర్ష ప్రణాళిక తీసుకున్నాం. మళ్ళీ తిరిగి 90-92 మధ్య కాలంలో మళ్ళీ తిరిగి 2 వార్షిక ప్రణాళికలు తీసుకున్నాం. ఆ తర్వాత 8వ పంచవర్ష ప్రణాళిక కాలంలో కూడా 1992 నుండి 97కి 5.6% టార్గెట్ పెట్టుకొని 6.5% సాధించుకుంది. 9వ పంచవర్ష ప్రణాళిక కాలం మరి 97 నుంచి 2000 వరకు, ఈ కాలానికి 6.5% టార్గెట్గా పెట్టుకొని 5.4% సక్సెస్ఫుల్గా సాధించుకున్నాం. ఆ తర్వాత 2002 నుంచి 2007 వరకు 10వ పంచవర్ష ప్రణాళిక కాలంగా చెప్పుకుంటాం. ఈ 10వ పంచవర్ష కాలంలో కూడా 9.0% టార్గెట్గా పెట్టుకున్నాం. 7.5% వృద్ధి రేటును సాధించుకున్నాం. అంటే దాదాపుగా అత్యంత వృద్ధి రేటు సాధించుకున్నటువంటి ప్రణాళిక ఏంటిది అంటే అది 10వ పంచవర్ష ప్రణాళికనే మనం గుర్తుపెట్టుకోవాలి. ఆ తర్వాత 2007 నుంచి 2012 వరకు, మరి 2007 నుంచి 2012 వరకు టార్గెట్ ఎంత అంటే 9.09. ఇక్కడ దాదాపుగా ఈ గడిచినటువంటి ఈ 9 పంచవర్ష ప్రణాళికల కాలంలో ఎప్పుడు కూడా 9% వృద్ధి రేటును టార్గెట్లు తీసుకోలేదు. కానీ ఇక్కడ తీసుకున్నాం. ఆ తర్వాత 11 పంచవర్ష ప్రణాళిక కాలంలో కూడా 7.5% వృద్ధి రేటును సాధించుకున్నాం. అటు 2012-17 లోపల మళ్ళా 2014 లోపల ప్రభుత్వం మారింది. ప్రభుత్వం మార్పు చెందిన తర్వాత మరి ఇక్కడ 12 పంచవర్ష ప్రణాళికని మరి దాదాపుగా ఒక 2 సంవత్సరాల కాలంలోనే దాన్ని క్లోజ్ చేసుకొని ఈ ప్రణాళిక సంఘం స్థానంలో కూడా నీతి ఆయోగ్, నేషనల్ ఇన్స్టిట్యూట్ ఆఫ్ ట్రాన్స్ఫార్మింగ్ ఇండియా అనేటువంటి ఒక నూతన అధ్యయనానికి తరలింది. ఒక నూతన ఒక ఒరవడికి మరి ఇక్కడ ప్రాధాన్యత కల్పించుకుంది. ఎక్కువ కలిగి ఉంది. ఎందుకోసం అంటే అభివృద్ధి చెందకపోవడానికి ముఖ్య కారణం అనేక వృద్ధి నమూనాలలో కూడా చెప్తున్న అంశం ఏంటంటే తక్కువ మూలధనమే అధిక ముఖ్య కారణం. అంటే అల్ప మూలధన కొరత అన్నది ఇక్కడ చాలా కాంప్లికేటెడ్ జోన్లో పట్టేస్తుంది ఎకానమీని. ఏది ఏమైనా కూడా మరి టార్గెట్ 2.1 నుంచి 9% తీసుకోవడానికి వృద్ధి రేట్లు టార్గెట్లు కొంత సక్సెస్ఫుల్గా పెంచుకుంటూ వచ్చినాం. మరి సాధించినటువంటి ప్రగతి ఎంత అంటే 4.6% మొదటి పంచాయతీ ప్రణాళిక నుండి 6.7% మరి 12వ పంచాయతీ ప్రణాళిక వరకు వృద్ధి రేట్లు కూడా కొంత కాపాడుతూ డెవలప్ చేసుకుంటూ వచ్చినాం. ఈ విధంగా ఒక్కొక్క సెక్టార్ నుండి ఒక్కొక్క నమూనా బలపడాలి అంటే పారిశ్రామిక రంగం స్ట్రెంథింగ్ కావాలి అంటే వ్యవసాయ రంగం కూడా స్ట్రెంథింగ్ కావాలి. ఎలా, ఎందుకు, ఎలా, ఈ అంశాన్ని మనం ఎందుకు ఇక్కడ స్పెషలైజ్ చేస్తున్నాం అంటే చూడండి, షుగర్ పరిశ్రమ, షుగర్ ఇండస్ట్రీ, మరి ఈ షుగర్ కేన్ అంతా కూడా ప్రొడ్యూస్ చేసేది ఏంటి? అగ్రికల్చర్ సెక్టర్. కాబట్టి అగ్రికల్చర్ లేకుండా, షుగర్ కేన్ లేకుండా షుగర్ ఎట్లా ఇస్తాము? ఆ తర్వాత కాటన్ ఇండస్ట్రీస్, జూట్ ఇండస్ట్రీస్. అంటే ఒక్కొక్క రంగంలో ఒకట, ఒక్కొక్క సెక్టార్లో ఒకట మరి వృద్ధి నమూనాలు మరి అన్నీ కూడా ఈ మూలధనాన్ని ప్రేరేపించబడినటువంటిది. అంటే ఎందుకోసం ఇక్కడ మూలధనానికి అంతటి ప్రాధాన్యత ఉందని మనం చెప్పుకుంటున్నామంటే వృద్ధి రేట్లు తీసుకొచ్చుకున్నాం, టార్గెట్లు పెంచుతూ వచ్చినాం, సాధించినటువంటి ప్రగతి వృద్ధి రేట్లను కూడా పెంచుతూ వచ్చినాం. కానీ అయినా ఇప్పటికీ ఇంకా మనం అభివృద్ధి చెందలేకపోయాము. చెందడానికి ఇంకా ట్యాగ్ తీసుకుంటున్నటువంటి కారణం ఏంటంటే మనం చూడొచ్చు. ఆ తర్వాత ఈ రూరల్ పాపులేషన్ కానీ అర్బన్ పాపులేషన్ కానీ ఏ విధంగా ఉంది? 1961లో 82% రూరల్ పాపులేషన్, మరి అర్బన్ పాపులేషన్ ఎంత అంటే 18% మాత్రమే. మరి 1971లో 80% ఉంది, అటు 19.9%, అంటే అరౌండ్ 20% అర్బన్ ఏరియాస్. 1991లో 76% రూరల్ పాపులేషన్ ఉంది. అంటే ఇక్కడికి వచ్చేసరికి ఎంత అంటే 23.1% మాత్రమే మనం వృద్ధి సాధించుకున్నాం అర్బన్ పాపులేషన్. ఆ తర్వాత 1981లో 76% నుండి మరి రూరల్ పాపులేషన్, అర్బన్ పాపులేషన్ 23%కి పెంచుకున్నాం. ఆ తర్వాత 1991లో 76 నుంచి 74కి తగ్గించుకున్నాం రూరల్ పాపులేషన్ని, 23 నుంచి 25కి పెంచుకున్నాం అర్బన్ పాపులేషన్. అంతేకాకుండా 2001 సంవత్సరంలో 72.2% రూరల్ పాపులేషన్ ఉంటే మరి 27.8% అర్బన్ పాపులేషన్గా ఉంది, అంటే అరౌండ్ 29%. ఇక 2011లో 68% 68.8% రూరల్ పాపులేషన్ ఉంటే 31.2% అర్బన్ పాపులేషన్ ఉందని చెప్పుకోవచ్చు. ఈ 2021-22 సెన్సస్ ప్రకారం దాదాపుగా 67% జనాభా, 67% పాపులేషన్ ఇక్కడ రూరల్ ఏరియాలలో ఉంది అనుకోవచ్చు. అంతేకాకుండా మరి అర్బన్ పాపులేషన్ ఎంత అంటే దాదాపుగా 33%, అరౌండ్ 33%కి పెరిగిందని మనం సంతోషించుకోవచ్చు. ఏది ఏమైనా వ్యవసాయ, పారిశ్రామిక రంగాలు, సేవల రంగాల యొక్క అభివృద్ధి అన్నది లేకుండా ఆర్థిక అభివృద్ధి సాధ్యం కాదు. అంటే ఎందుకోసం ఇక్కడ మనం ఇట్లా వ్యాఖ్యానిస్తున్నాం అంటే వివిధ సెక్టార్లలో కూడా, వివిధ రంగాలలో కూడా, వివిధ రంగాల అభివృద్ధిలో కూడా, ప్రగతిలో కూడా, డెవలప్మెంట్లో ఏ దేశమైనా స్వతహాగా సమీకరించుకోవడం వనరు అనేది సాధ్యం కాకపోవచ్చు. అందుకని ఇతర దేశాలపైన ఆధారపడవచ్చు, డిపెండ్ కావచ్చు. కాబట్టి ఏమవుతుంది అంటే ఇక్కడ పెద్ద మొత్తంలో కూడా వ్యవసాయ రంగంలో మార్పులకి దోహదపడుతుంది. సాధారణంగా ఆధునిక ప్రపంచంలో కూడా ఆధునిక అర్థశాస్త్రవేత్తలందరూ కూడా ఏమంటారంటే ఇక్కడ వ్యవసాయ రంగం యొక్క ప్రాధాన్యత తగ్గుతూ ఉండాలి, పారిశ్రామిక సేవల రంగాల యొక్క ప్రాధాన్యత పెరుగుతూ ఉండాలి. అంటే తగ్గడం అంటే వృద్ధి ఫలాలు తగ్గకూడదు, ప్రొడక్టివిటీ తగ్గకూడదు. ఏం కావాలి అంటే స్పీడీ ర్యాపిడ్ గ్రోత్, డెవలప్మెంట్ అన్నది ఇటు పారిశ్రామిక సేవల రంగాల వైపు తరలి రావాలి. అంటే వృద్ధి ఫలాలు అక్కడి నుంచి ఎక్కువగా ఉండాలి, అక్కడి నుంచి ఎక్కువ వృద్ధి ఫలాలు చేకూరాలి. అట్లయితే ఏమవుతుంది అంటే కిండల్ బర్జర్ అనే అర్థశాస్త్రవేత్త ప్రకారం అప్పుడు ఎకనామిక్ డెవలప్మెంట్ అనేది ఈజీ అవుతుంది, తర్వాత స్పీడీ అండ్ ర్యాపిడ్ గ్రోత్ ఆఫ్ ఎకనామిక్ డెవలప్మెంట్ అనేది కూడా జరుగుతుంది. అంటే 1951 నుండి 2021 వరకు కూడా ఎంతో ప్రగతిని సాధించుకుంటూ వచ్చినాం. అందులో భాగమే ఇక్కడ మనం వృత్తి అచీవ్మెంట్స్ కూడా చెప్పుకున్నాం. ఎందుకంటే 4.6% 1951లో 56లో ఉంటే అది 6.7%, అరౌండ్ 7.3% వృద్ధిని ఆర్థిక ప్రగతిని సాధించుకుంటూ వచ్చినామని చెప్పి. కాబట్టి మనలాంటి అభివృద్ధి చెందుతున్నటువంటి దేశాలు వ్యవసాయ రంగాన్ని నెగ్లెక్ట్ చేసినట్టయితే, కాపాడుకోనట్లయితే పారిశ్రామిక సేవల రంగాల అభివృద్ధి అన్నది అంత సాధ్యమయ్యేటువంటి పని కాదు. దాని ద్వారా ఏమవుతుంది అంటే వ్యవసాయ రంగంలోని మిగులు అనేది కాస్త పారిశ్రామిక రంగానికి, పారిశ్రామిక రంగంలోని మిగులు కాస్త సేవల రంగానికి తరలిపోతూ ఉంటుంది. అట్లా తరలిపోవడాన్ని ఒరిజినల్ ఆర్థిక అభివృద్ధిగా మనం పిలుస్తూ ఉంటాం, చెప్పుకుంటూ ఉంటాం. అంటే ఎందుకంటే ఇక్కడ చూద్దాం, జీడిపిలో కూడా 1951 నుండి 2021 వరకు 53% నుండి 48%, 48% నుండి 42%, 42% నుండి 36%, 36% నుండి 29%, 29 నుండి 22కి, 22 నుండి 14కి, 14 నుండి 13కి, 13 నుంచి మళ్ళీ 20కి, మళ్ళీ 20 నుంచి మళ్ళీ 18కి, మళ్ళీ 18 నుంచి మళ్ళీ 16కి, మళ్ళీ 16 నుంచి మళ్ళీ ఇలా వృద్ధి రేటు సాధించుకుంటూ వస్తుంది. అదేవిధంగా పారిశ్రామిక రంగం అన్నది 16%, 16.6%. 16 అంటే వ్యవసాయ రంగంలో కూడా ఉన్నటువంటి జీడిపి అనేది క్రమంగా తగ్గుతూ వస్తున్నప్పుడు వ్యవసాయేతర రంగాల జీడిపి అనేది క్రమక్రమంగా పెరుగుతూ వస్తుంది అని మనం భావించుకోవాలి, గుర్తుపెట్టుకోవాలి. మరి ఇది దేనికి ఇండికేషన్ అంటే వ్యవసాయ రంగంలో ఉన్నటువంటి జీడిపి వర్కింగ్ పాపులేషన్ క్రమక్రమంగా తగ్గుతూ సేవల రంగాలకు, పారిశ్రామిక సేవల రంగాల వృద్ధి వైపు ఇది అంటే అప్పుడు దాదాపు ఏమవుతుంది అంటే ఆ విధంగా గ్రోత్ రేట్స్, వృద్ధి రేట్స్ అనేవి సాధించుకున్నప్పుడు పారిశ్రామిక రంగం, సేవల రంగాలు ఒక క్రూషియల్ రోల్ ప్లే చేస్తూ ఆర్థిక అభివృద్ధి. అది 16 నుంచి 20కి, 20 నుంచి 24, 24 నుంచి 25కి, 25 నుంచి 27కి, 27 నుంచి 28కి, 27 నుంచి 29కి మరి పారిశ్రామిక రంగంలో కూడా క్రమక్రమంగా పెరుగుతూ వచ్చింది జీడిపి. అదేవిధంగా మరి సేవల రంగంలో కానీ ఏ విధంగా ఉంది అంటే 30.3% నుండి 30.8కి, 33.8కి, 38.8కి, 42.7కి, ఆ తర్వాత 38 నుంచి 42కి, 42 నుంచి 50.4కి, 50.4 నుంచి 57.4కి, 57.4 నుంచి 57.7 నుంచి 59.0కి, 59.0 నుండి 51.1కి, 51 నుంచి 1 నుంచి 53.3కి, 53.3 నుంచి 54.3కి పెరుగుతూ వచ్చింది. అంటే ఎప్పుడైతే ఈ పారిశ్రామిక సేవల రంగాల యొక్క జీడిపి అనేది క్రమక్రమంగా పెరుగుతుందో అప్పుడు వ్యవసాయ రంగంలో ఉన్నటువంటి జీడిపి శాతం క్రమక్రమంగా పెరుగుతుంది. దీనిని ఆర్థిక అభివృద్ధికి సూచికగా చెప్పుకోవచ్చు అంటారు పిల్లల మధ్య మరియు ఆధునిక అర్థశాస్త్రవేత్తలు. మరి ఈ దేశంలో ఇంకా ఏమైనా క్లిష్టమైనటువంటి పరిస్థితులు ఉన్నాయంటే ఉన్నాయి. అభివృద్ధి చెందుతున్నటువంటి దేశాలన్నీ కూడా సాధారణంగా అనేక సమస్యలని ఫేస్ చేస్తున్నాయి. పేదరికం, నిరుద్యోగం, అల్ప ఉద్యోగితం, అల్ప ఆదాయ స్థాయి, అల్ప వినియోగం, అల్ప డిమాండ్, సప్లై. అంటే ఒక్కొక్క ఫ్యాక్టర్ని మనం కనుక గమనించినట్లయితే ఒక్కొక్క ఫ్యాక్టరీకి ఇంటర్లింక్ అయినటువంటి అంశాలు అన్ని కూడా అభివృద్ధి చెందుతున్నటువంటి దేశాలలో చాలా డామినేట్ ప్లే చేస్తుంది. ఎందుకోసం అంటే ఇప్పుడు వ్యవసాయ రంగం అభివృద్ధి చెందాలంటే వ్యవసాయ అనుబంధ పరిశ్రమలు అభివృద్ధి చెందాలి. పారిశ్రామిక రంగం అభివృద్ధి చెందాలంటే పారిశ్రామిక రంగం అభివృద్ధి అనుబంధ సంవత్సరాన్ని అభివృద్ధి చెందాలి. గ్రోత్ రేట్ అనేది సాధించుకోవడం, వృద్ధి రేట్ అనేది సాధించుకుంటూ వస్తున్నాం. ఇప్పుడు నీతి ఆయోగ్ కూడా చాలా చక్కటి రిజల్ట్ తీసుకోవడానికి, భారతదేశాన్ని సిస్టమేటిక్ గా నడిపించడానికి, ఎకనామీని కొంత పటిష్టం చేయడానికి, అంటే వ్యవసాయ రంగానికి, వ్యవసాయేతర రంగానికి ఉన్నటువంటి వాటిని క్లియర్గా పరిష్కరించడానికి ఎప్పుడైతే ఏ దేశం అయితే శ్రామికులని, జాతీయ ఆదాయం లేదా గ్రాస్ డొమెస్టిక్ ప్రొడక్ట్ ని వ్యవసాయ అభివృద్ధి చెందినటువంటి దేశాలన్నీ కూడా. అంటే మరి అభివృద్ధి చెందినటువంటి దేశాలు అన్ని కూడా అనాదిగా వ్యవసాయ రంగానికి ప్రాధాన్యత ఇచ్చినటువంటి దేశాలు కాదు మరి. కొన్ని దేశాలు మాత్రం ఉన్నవి, ముఖ్యంగా ఆస్ట్రేలియా, కెనడా, బ్రెజిల్, జపాన్, న్యూజిలాండ్, ఆ తర్వాత ముఖ్యంగా ఈ దేశాలలో ముందుగా వ్యవసాయ రంగానికి, ఆ తర్వాత పారిశ్రామిక రంగానికి, ఆ తర్వాత సేవల రంగానికి క్రమక్రమంగా నడుస్తూ వచ్చింది. అంటే ఆ విధంగా అభివృద్ధి అనేది సాధ్యమైంది. ఇది ప్రపంచంలో ఉన్నటువంటి అన్ని దేశాలు వ్యవసాయ రంగాన్ని, పారిశ్రామిక సేవల రంగాలని మరి పటిష్టవంతం చేసుకుంటూ ముందుకు పోవాల్సిందే, తప్పదు. ఎందుకోసం తప్పదు అంటే ఆహార పదార్థాలన్నీ కూడా దేశ జనాభాకి కావాల్సినటువంటి అవసరాలను కూడా తీర్చేది వ్యవసాయ రంగం కాబట్టి వ్యవసాయ రంగాన్ని అభివృద్ధి చేయకుండా, అభివృద్ధి సాధించకుండా స్ట్రాంగ్ గా కనిపిస్తూ ఉంటుంది. ఇంపాక్ట్ ఈ ముఖ్య అంశాల వలననే అభివృద్ధి చెందుతున్నటువంటి దేశమైనటువంటి ఇండియా కానీ, అభివృద్ధి చెందుతున్న దేశాలలో వ్యవసాయ రంగంలో కూడా ప్రత్యక్ష నిరుద్యోగిత అనేది ఉంటుంది అని మనం చూడడం జరిగింది. రాగ్నర్ నరక్స్ అనేటువంటి అర్థశాస్త్రవేత్త చెప్పడం జరుగుతుంది. అంటే ఇటు వ్యవసాయ రంగాలు, పారిశ్రామిక రంగాలు, వ్యవసాయ పారిశ్రామిక సేవల రంగాలు బ్యాలెన్స్డ్గా వృద్ధి సాధించాలి. బ్యాలెన్స్డ్ వృద్ధి సాధించినట్లయితే ఆటోమేటికల్లీ ఆటోమేటికల్లీ ఆయా దేశాలు ఆయా రంగాలు పటిష్టవంతం అవుతుంది. అంటే సాధారణంగా మరి వ్యవసాయ పారిశ్రామిక రంగాలకి ఇంత ప్రాధాన్యత ఉంది అని మరి సేవల రంగాలకి లేదని చెప్పుకోలేదు. ఎందుకు చెప్పుకోలేదు? సేవల రంగాన్ని ఏమనుకున్నాం? బూస్టింగ్ సెక్టార్ అనుకున్నాం. బూస్టింగ్ సెక్టార్ అంటే సాంఘిక ఆర్థిక పరమైనటువంటి వ్యవస్థాపన పెట్టుబడులను అందించడానికి. వ్యవసాయ పారిశ్రామిక రంగాలకి కావలసినటువంటి సేవలను అందించడానికి మరి సేవల రంగమే కీలకమైనటువంటిది. మళ్ళీ తిరిగి నెక్స్ట్ క్లాస్లో కలుస్తాం.
Good afternoon. আজি আমি BPSC 133 Unit 3 British Administration System এইটোৰ চাপ্টাৰটো ষ্টাৰ্ট কৰিম। চ' ইমান দিন আমি মোগল সাম্ৰাজ্যৰ এইটো চালোঁ, তাৰপিছত গুপ্ত সাম্ৰাজ্য, তাৰপিছত মোগল সাম্ৰাজ্য এইখিনি চালোঁ। এতিয়া আমি ব্ৰিটিছৰ নেক্সট ব্ৰিটিছ আহিছিলে, ব্ৰিটিছৰটো কেনেকুৱা হ'ল সেইখিনি আমি চাম আজি। চ' এইটো চাপ্টাৰৰ ষ্ট্ৰাকচাৰত কি আছে, ফাৰ্ষ্টত ইষ্ট ইণ্ডিয়া কোম্পানী, দেন ব্ৰিটিছ এডমিনিষ্ট্ৰেশ্যন, দেন মেইলমেণ্ট সংস্কাৰ, তাৰপিছত মণ্টেজ কেম্পছফোৰ্ড সংস্কাৰ, প্ৰদেশসমূহৰ ডায়েৰকীৰ যন্ত্ৰ, তাৰপিছত ভাৰত চৰকাৰৰ আইন 1935 এইটো, তাৰপিছত অল ইণ্ডিয়া ফেডাৰেশ্যন, প্ৰাদেশিক সাহিত্য শাসন, এইবোৰ আছিলে এইটো চাপ্টাৰত ষ্ট্ৰাকচাৰত। চ' গোটেই চাপ্টাৰখিনি মেবি আজি আমি কভাৰ কৰিব নোৱাৰিম, তথাপিও যিমানখিনি আমি কভাৰ কৰিব পাৰিম সিমানখিনি আজি আমি আলোচনা কৰিম। নেক্সট হ'ল এইটো চাপ্টাৰৰ অবজেক্টিভবোৰ কি আছিলে, মুখ্য উদ্দেশ্যবোৰ হ'ল ইষ্ট ইণ্ডিয়া কোম্পানীৰ প্ৰশাসনিক স্থাপন, তাৰপিছত 1858 ইয়াৰৰ পৰা 1935 লৈকে ব্ৰিটিছ প্ৰশাসনে গ্ৰহণ কৰা সংস্কাৰসমূহ, সিহঁতৰ বেনিফিটটো বিচাৰিছে, তেনেকা সিহঁতে কিছুমান সংস্কাৰো বিচাৰিছে আমাৰ দেশৰ কাৰণে বহুত বস্তু সিহঁতৰ প্ৰশাসনৰ টাইমত, আৰু সিহঁতৰ মুখ্য বৈশিষ্ট্যবোৰ কি এইখিনি আছিলে এই অবজেক্টবোৰ। তাৰপিছত এতিয়া আমি চাওঁ ব্ৰিটিছবিলাক মোগল সাম্ৰাজ্য থকা অৱস্থাতেই ব্ৰিটিছবোৰ আহিছিলে। জেনেৰেলি আন ইউৰোপীয় জাতিবোৰৰ দৰে ব্ৰিটিছসকলো ভাৰতবৰ্ষৰ লগতে পোনপটীয়াকৈ বেপাৰৰ বাবে আগ্ৰহী হৈ আছিলে। যেনেকা বেলেগ কাণ্ট্ৰিত যেনেকা সিহঁতে বেনিফিটবোৰ ল'ব বিচাৰিছে, যেনেকা আৰৱ এইবোৰ মোগল সাম্ৰাজ্যত যেতিয়া সিহঁতে বিজনেছৰ থ্ৰুতে আহিছিলে, ছেইম তেনেকা ব্ৰিটিছবোৰো সিহঁতে এটা বাহিৰৰ পৰা সিহঁতে ফ'ল' কৰি আছিলে। এইবোৰ চাই কিনি সিহঁতেও নিজে এটা ভাৰতবৰ্ষৰ লগত বেপাৰৰ বাবে আগ্ৰহী হৈ উঠিছিলে। চ' গ্ৰেট ব্ৰিটেইনৰ বণিকসকলে এই উদ্দেশ্যত 1599ত ব্ৰিটিছ ইষ্ট ইণ্ডিয়া কোম্পানী নামৰ এটা বেচৰকাৰী কোম্পানী প্ৰতিষ্ঠা কৰিছিলে। আৰু এই প্ৰতিষ্ঠান কৰিছিলে তেতিয়া বেলেগ ইউৰোপীয়বোৰো তেতিয়া সিহঁতৰ পৰ্তুগীজসকলো তেতিয়া ইণ্ডিয়াৰ লগত বহুত বিজনেছ কৰি আছিলে। চ' ইষ্ট ইণ্ডিয়াটো তেতিয়াহে এইটো নামতহে সোমাইছিলে। তো 1600 খ্ৰীষ্টাব্দত এই কোম্পানীয়ে প্ৰাচ্যৰ লগত একচেটিয়া বেপাৰ বাণিজ্য কৰাৰ কাৰণে ৰাণী প্ৰথম এলিজাবেথৰ পৰা 24 বছৰৰ কাৰণে ৰাজকীয় অনুমতি পত্ৰ লাভ কৰিছিলে। এই পত্ৰমতে প্ৰাচ্যৰ লগত বেপাৰৰ ক্ষেত্ৰত ব্ৰিটিছ ইণ্ডিয়া কোম্পানীৰ বাহিৰেও সেই দেশৰ অইন কোনো কোম্পানীয়ে প্ৰতিদ্বন্দ্বিতা কৰিব নোৱাৰিব, মানে এটাই কোম্পানী অনলি কৰিব পাৰিব। 1609ত ব্ৰিটিছ ইষ্ট ইণ্ডিয়া কোম্পানীয়ে মোগল সম্ৰাট জাহাংগীৰৰ দৰবাৰলৈ উইলিয়াম হকিন্স তাৰপিছত এই নামৰ যে এগৰাকী বিষয় আছিলে, তেওঁ চুৰাটৰ ফেক্টৰী স্থাপনৰ বাবে অনুমতি ল'বলৈ পঠিয়াইছিলে। কিন্তু পৰ্তুগীজসকলৰ প্ৰভাৱত সম্ৰাটে প্ৰথম অনুমতি প্ৰদান কৰিবলৈ, যিহেতু তেতিয়া পৰ্তুগীজসকলে বিজনেছ কৰি আছিলে, সেইটো কাৰণে তেওঁ ফাৰ্ষ্টত সেইটো অনুমতি দিয়া নাছিলে। কিন্তু লাষ্টত 1613ত গৈ তেওঁ সম্ৰাটজন মান্তি হৈছিলে। চ' আন এজন ব্ৰিটিছ বণিক ছাৰ থমাছ ৰবেও মোগল সম্ৰাট জাহাংগীৰৰ দৰবাৰলৈ আহি 3 বছৰ থাকি তাতে আগ্ৰা, চুৰাট, আহমেদাবাদ আৰু ব্ৰছত বাণিজ্য কুটি পাতিবলৈ অনুমতি পায়। ছেইম তেনেকা সিহঁতে বহুত লাগি মেলি ধৰি সিহঁতে অনুমতি পাইছিলে। ব্ৰিটিছসকলৰ এটা ব্যৱসায়িক নিগমৰ বেনাৰত ব্যৱসায়ী হিচাপে ভাৰতত উপস্থিত হৈছিলে। ব্ৰিটিছ মুকুটে 1600 খ্ৰীষ্টাব্দৰ পানীত ব্যৱসায়ীসকলৰ এটা গোটক একচেটিয়া বাণিজ্য প্ৰদান কৰিছিলে। কোম্পানীয়ে এটা ব্যৱসায়িক নিগম হিচাপে ভাৰতত উপস্থিত হৈছিলে আৰু সিহঁতে এই বেপাৰটো 1765 চনলৈকে চলি আছিলে। এই গোটটোত আমি ভাৰতত ব্ৰিটিছ প্ৰশাসনৰ ব্যৱস্থাৰো সাংবিধানিক আৰু প্ৰশাসনিক দুয়োটাই যি সিহঁতৰ প্ৰশাসন ব্যৱস্থাত কনষ্টিটিউশ্যনত যিবোৰ সিহঁতে প্ৰভাৱ পেলাইছিলে সেইটো আৰু কনষ্টিটিউশ্যনেল এণ্ড যি এডমিনিষ্ট্ৰেটিভ দুটাই আমি ইয়াতে আলোচনা কৰিম তেতিয়া সিহঁতৰ বিজনেছৰ লগতে চ' আমি ইষ্ট ইণ্ডিয়াৰ বিষয়তে ইষ্ট ইণ্ডিয়াৰ যেতিয়া আমি ইষ্ট ইণ্ডিয়া কোম্পানীটো জেনেৰেলি ইংলেণ্ডৰ পৰাই ব্ৰিটিছৰ পৰাই অহা এইটো এটা কোম্পানী আছিলে তেতিয়া ইষ্ট ইণ্ডিয়া কোম্পানী কেম টু এইটো ইণ্ডিয়াত আহিছিলে এটা বিজনেছৰ কাৰণে আৰু সিহঁতে আগষ্ট 75ত সিহঁতে মোগল এম্পায়াৰ যেতিয়া যিমান দিনলৈকে ঔৰংগজেব আছিলে তেতিয়ালৈকে তেওঁলোকে ইমান এটা পাৱাৰ ফুটাব পৰা নাই কিন্তু ঔৰংগজেব যেতিয়া আফটাৰ দ্য ডেথ অফ ঔৰংগজেব তেওঁলোকে এইটো এটা সুবিধা ল'লে সিহঁতৰ বিজনেছটো কৰিবৰ কাৰণে মোগল সাম্ৰাজ্যত অলপ উইকনেছ পালে আৰু উইকনেছ পাই পেলাই সিহঁতে এইটো যথেষ্ট সিহঁতে আগবাঢ়ি আহিলে আৰু ইষ্ট ইণ্ডিয়া কোম্পানীৰ তেনেকুৱা এটা সিহঁতে ভাষ্ট এডমিনিষ্ট্ৰেটিভ মেচিনৰ নিচিনা সিহঁতে চব ফালে সিহঁতৰ ছেটআপ কৰি ল'লে গোটেইবোৰ আৰু যিটো ইণ্ডিয়াৰ প্ৰভিঞ্চেছৰ কোনো এখনতো যে নাই তেনেকুৱা নহয় চবতে আছিলে লৰ্ড কৰ্ণৱালিছ আছিলে তেওঁ কি কৰিছিলে তেতিয়া এইবোৰত চিভিল ছাৰ্ভিচৰ লগতে তেওঁ বহুত ৰিলেটেড হৈ গ'লে আৰু তেওঁ ৰেগুলাৰাইজ ডিষ্ট্ৰিক্ট কালেক্টৰো ৰেগুলাৰাইজ কৰিলে আৰু এষ্টাব্লিছ কৰিলে অফিচ ডিষ্ট্ৰিক্ট জাজ এইবোৰো তেওঁ এষ্টাব্লিছ কৰিলে চ' এইখিনিলৈকে আমি চালে গম পাওঁ যে সিহঁতৰ বিজনেছৰ কাৰণে যে অকলে বিজনেছৰ লগতে সিহঁতৰ লাভখিনিৰ লগতেও আমাৰ দেশৰ কাৰণেও যথেষ্ট এইবোৰ সিহঁতে কামখিনি কৰি গৈছে চ' কোম্পানী পইচাৰ ক্ষেত্ৰত আৰু প্ৰফিটৰ ক্ষেত্ৰত সিহঁতে যথেষ্ট লাভ কৰিছিলে আৰু এইটো সময়তে সিহঁতে বহুত কেইখন এক্টো বনাইছিলে যেনেকা ৰেগুলেটিং এক্ট বুলি আমি এইখিনি আগতেও পাইছোঁ এইবোৰ ব্ৰিটিছৰ বহুত কেইখন এক্ট বনাইছিলে যাৰ মাজত গোটেইবোৰ ছাকচেছ হোৱা নাই আৰু কিছুমান ফেইলাৰো হৈছে যেনেকা তাৰ মাজত যেনেকা 1970 ৰেগুলেটিং এক্টটো যিটো আছিলে এইটো ছাকচেছ হৈছিলে আৰু পিটছ ইণ্ডিয়া এক্ট বুলি 1784ত এটা সেইটোও ছাকচেছ হৈছিলে কিন্তু মেক্সিমাম যেনেকা 84ত তাৰপিছত আৰু বহুত কেইখন 1993 1813 1833 আৰু 1853 এইবোৰ মেক্সিমাম ছাকচেছ হ'ব পৰা নাই ভাৰতবৰ্ষত কি আছিলে ব্ৰিটিছ আৰু আমি ফৰাচী বিপ্লৱ বুলি শুনিছিলোঁ তেতিয়া ব্ৰিটিছ আৰু ফৰাচী বিপ্লৱ এইখিনিত যথেষ্ট সিহঁতে এটা ব্ৰিটিছ ইষ্ট দুটা কোম্পানীয়ে যথেষ্ট সিহঁতে মোগলৰ লগত আৰু আন দেশীয় ৰাজ্যবোৰৰ লগত সিহঁতৰ দুৰ্বলতাৰ বিষয়টো সিহঁতে বুজি উঠিছিলে যে আমাৰ কি দুৰ্বলতা আছে বা মোগলসকলৰ কি দুৰ্বলতা ব্ৰিটিছ ইষ্ট ইণ্ডিয়া কোম্পানী আৰু ফৰাচী ইষ্ট ইণ্ডিয়া কোম্পানীয়ে লাহে লাহে মোগল সাম্ৰাজ্য আৰু আন দেশীয় ৰাজবোৰৰ যিবোৰ দুৰ্বলতা গোটেইখিনি সিহঁতে বুজি উঠিছিলে আৰু কোম্পানীয়ে ভাৰতবৰ্ষত নিজৰ একোখন সাম্ৰাজ্য গঢ়ি তোলাৰ সপোন দেখিছিলে সিহঁতেও মানে ভাবিছিলে ইয়াতে সিহঁতে এখন ৰাজ্য সাম্ৰাজ্য গঢ়ি উঠিব সেইটোৰ সপোনো দেখিছিলে সেয়ে দুয়োপক্ষই ভাৰতবৰ্ষত ৰাজনৈতিক আধিপত্য বিস্তাৰৰ বাবে সুযোগৰ অপেক্ষাত আছিলে তাৰপিছত এই সুযোগটো লাহে লাহে আহি পৰিলে 1740 যেতিয়া অষ্ট্ৰেলিয়াত যুদ্ধৰ আৰম্ভ হৈছিলে আৰু ইউৰোপীয় শক্তিক্ৰমে ব্ৰিটিছ আৰু ফৰাচীসকলে পৰস্পৰ বিৰোধী পক্ষতো যোগ দিছিলে ফলত ভাৰতবৰ্ষত থকা ব্ৰিটিছ আৰু ফৰাচীৰ সম্পৰ্কতো যথেষ্ট প্ৰভাৱ পৰিছিলে সিহঁতে য'ত এনেকা দুৰ্বলতা চাই সিহঁতে যুদ্ধ ক্ষেত্ৰত আগবাঢ়ি আহিছিলে ফৰাচীসকলৰ এই কাৰ্যত প্ৰত্যুত্তৰ হিচাপে ব্ৰিটিছৰ প্ৰকোপত নজীব জং আৰু মহম্মদ আলীক সহায় কৰিবলৈ সিদ্ধান্ত লৈছিলে তেতিয়া যি মোগল সাম্ৰাজ্যত সিহঁতে বহুত দুৰ্বল হৈ আছিলে তেতিয়া আৰু সিহঁতক এই সুযোগটো সিহঁতে লৈছিলে। এনেকুৱা সংকটপূৰ্ণ পৰিস্থিতিত ব্ৰিটিছ গভৰ্ণৰ চাণ্ডাৰ্ড ৰবাৰ্ট ক্লাইভ নামৰ এজন দেখা বিষয়াক কৰ্ণাটক অভিযানৰ দায়িত্ব দিয়া হৈছিলে। আৰু তাতে কৰ্ণাটকত ক্লাইভে বিজয় তেওঁ এইখিনি বিজয় কৰিছিলে। আৰু এনেকৈ সিহঁতে লাহে লাহে নিজৰ কিছুমান ৰাজ্যত সিহঁতে হস্তক্ষেপ কৰি ল'লে। ইতিমধ্যে নিজ নিজ গৃহ চৰকাৰে কি কৰিলে, ভাৰতবৰ্ষত আভ্যন্তৰীণ বিষয়ত হস্তক্ষেপ নকৰাৰ সিদ্ধান্ত লোৱাত দুখন ৰাষ্ট্ৰীয় যুদ্ধৰ পৰা বিৰত থাকিলে। তাৰপিছত গৃহ চৰকাৰে সদেশলৈ এইবিলাক সিহঁতে বিজনেছৰ জৰিয়তেও যিবোৰ ৰাষ্ট্ৰৰ সিহঁতে একো এফেক্ট কৰা নাই, জাষ্ট সিহঁতৰ বেনিফিটটো সিহঁতে চাই আছিলে। চ' এনেকা ইষ্ট ইণ্ডিয়া কোম্পানী লাহে লাহে পুৰা বিস্তাৰ কৰি ল'লে গোটেই। তাৰপিছত কলকাতাত সিহঁতে ইষ্ট ইণ্ডিয়া কোম্পানীৰ এখন স্থাপন কৰিলে। আৰু তাতে সিহঁতে কাৰ্যালয়ত ফাৰ্ষ্টতে কলকাতাত সিহঁতে পাৰা নাছিলে, কিন্তু ফৰাচী বিপ্লৱৰ পিছত সিহঁতে সিহঁতে চিৰাজউদ্দৌলাৰ লগত মিলি কৰি পেলাই সিহঁতে এইখিনিও সিহঁতে নিজৰ আয়ত্তত কৰি ল'লে। চ' আমি এইবিলাক যদি হিষ্ট্ৰীখিনি ক'বলৈ যাওঁ, তেনেহ'লে আমাৰ টাইম যথেষ্ট যাব। খ্ৰীষ্টাব্দ এটা 100 ইয়াৰ্ছৰ হ'ব অলমষ্ট। সেইখিনি আমি 1 ঘণ্টাৰ ভিতৰত ইমানখিনি যুদ্ধ বিগ্ৰহ এইখিনি ক'বলৈ গ'লে আমাৰ যি চেপ্টাৰৰ যোনখিনি মেইন অংশ সেইখিনিত আমি নজৰ কৰিব নোৱাৰিম। চ' মই কেইটামান পইণ্ট ক'লোঁ যিবিলাকৰ জৰিয়তে ইষ্ট ইণ্ডিয়া কোম্পানী কেনেকা সিহঁতে প্ৰভাৱ পেলাইছিলে ভাৰতত। চ' ইষ্ট ইণ্ডিয়া কোম্পানীয়ে ব্যৱসায়িক উদ্দেশ্যৰ সৈতে যি সিহঁতে ভাৰতত আহিছিলে সেইটো সিহঁতে উদ্ধাৰ কৰি ল'লে। আৰু শাসনৰ ক্ষেত্ৰতো সমগ্ৰ ব্যৱস্থাটো চৰিত্ৰত বাণিজ্যিক আছিলে। আইনী আৰু কাৰ্যবাহী ক্ষমতাখনত ৰাজ্যপালৰ নেতৃত্বত এখন পৰিষদো আছিলে সিহঁতৰ। পৰিষদে বাণিজ্য পৰিষদ, সামৰিক পৰিষদ, ৰাজহ পৰিষদ আৰু ৰেলৱে বৰ্ডো গঠন কৰে। গোটেই ক্ষেত্ৰতে সিহঁতে তাৰপিছত যেতিয়া সিহঁতৰ পাৱাৰখিনি বাঢ়ি গ'ল, তেতিয়া সিহঁতে কি কৰিলে, লাহে লাহে চবতে অলপ সিহঁতে এডমিনিষ্ট্ৰেটিভ যিবোৰ উন্নত ডেভেলপমেণ্টৰ ষ্টাৰ্ট কৰি দিছিলে। 1765 চনৰ আগষ্ট মাহৰ পৰা ৰাজহ সংগ্ৰহৰ পৰা আৰম্ভ হোৱা ঘটনাবোৰে ক্ৰমান্বয়ে অসামৰিক, ন্যায়িক আৰু সামৰিক বিষয়ৰ সৈতে সম্পৰ্কিত সম্পূৰ্ণ ক্ষমতা গ্ৰহণ কৰে। সিহঁতে কি কৰিলে, লাহে লাহে চবতে টেক্সৰ নিচিনা ল'ব আৰম্ভ কৰিলে। খেতিয়কে হওক আৰু বিজনেছে হওক, যি হওক, এইখিনি কৰাৰ পৰা চবৰ পৰা সিহঁতে অলপ অলপ এইবোৰ ষ্টাৰ্ট কৰিলে ল'বলৈ। তাৰপিছত সিহঁতে বহুত কেইখন এক্ট বনালে, যি এক্টৰ জৰিয়তে লৰ্ড কৰ্ণৱালিছ আৰু লৰ্ড ৱালেচিছৰ শাসন ষ্টাৰ্ট হ'ল। তাৰপিছত সিহঁতে সচিবালয়ৰ লগত শাখাগত ব্যৱস্থা লৰ্ড বেণ্টিংকৰ শাসনৰ অধীনত কৰা হৈছিলে। চাৰ্টাৰ আইন 1833ৰ অধীনত বংগৰ গভৰ্ণৰ জেনেৰেলক ভাৰতৰ গভৰ্ণৰ জেনেৰেল হিচাপে নিযুক্ত কৰা হৈছিলে, যি এতিয়া ভাৰতৰ ব্ৰিটিছ প্ৰশাসনৰ মুৰব্বী তেতিয়া হৈছিলে। লৰ্ড ডালহৌচীৰ বিফলতাৰ মতবাদী কোম্পানীটোক ভাৰতীয় ৰাজ্যসমূহৰ নীতিগত বিষয়ত পৰম ক্ষমতা আৰু নিয়ন্ত্ৰণ ৰাখিবলৈ সক্ষম কৰিছিলে। এইবোৰেই ইংৰাজসকলক ৰাজহৰ অধিকাৰৰ সৈতে এক শক্তিশালী আধাৰ স্থাপন কৰাত সহায় কৰিছিলে। যিহেতু সিহঁত পাৱাৰ আছিলে, এইখিনি ভাৰতবৰ্ষতে সিহঁতে এপ্লাই কৰি পেলাই সিহঁতে বেনিফিটেড হৈ আছিলে। লগতে যথেষ্ট সিহঁতে যিবোৰ চবৰ ক্ষেত্ৰত, ৰেলৰ ক্ষেত্ৰতে হওক আৰু চবৰ ক্ষেত্ৰত সিহঁতে যথেষ্ট উন্নতি কৰিছে। সেইটো কাৰণে ভাৰতবাসীসকলেও ইমান এটা গুৰুত্ব যে ব্ৰিটিছসকলৰ পৰা এটা কিবা নালাগে, এইটো বস্তু যে ডেভেলপমেণ্ট হোৱা নাই সেইটো অস্বীকাৰ কৰিব পৰা নাই সিহঁতে। যিহেতু সিহঁতে এইখিনিত যথেষ্ট লাভৱান হৈ আছিলে। লাভৱান হোৱাৰ কাৰণে ব্ৰিটিছসকলক সিহঁতে একো বস্তু যে বাধা দিব লাগে সেইটো বস্তু কৰা নাই। চ' ইষ্ট ইণ্ডিয়া কোম্পানীৰ লাহে লাহে এনেকা ইষ্ট ইণ্ডিয়া কোম্পানীৰ সেইটো সিহঁতে যথেষ্ট এটা আগবাঢ়ি গৈছিলে এইটোৰ ওপৰতে। তাৰপিছত ব্ৰিটিছ সংসদে দুটা মুখ্য আইন গৃহীত কৰিছিলে, যেনে নিয়ন্ত্ৰণ আইন আৰু যিটো নিয়ন্ত্ৰণ আইনক আমি জেনেৰেলি ৰেগুলেটিং এক্ট বুলি জানো। ৰেগুলেটিং এক্ট মিনছ নিয়ন্ত্ৰণ আইন 1773 আৰু পিটছ ইণ্ডিয়া আইন এটা 1784। চ' ভাৰতত ইষ্ট ইণ্ডিয়া কোম্পানীৰ শাসন ভাৰতত ব্ৰিটিছ দুটা 1773টো আছিলে ভাৰতৰ ইষ্ট ইণ্ডিয়া কোম্পানীৰ শাসন নিয়ন্ত্ৰণ তথা সুদৃঢ় কৰাৰ কাৰণে ব্ৰিটিছ সংসদে ৰেগুলেটিং এক্ট নামে এখন আইন প্ৰণয়ন কৰি বলবৎ কৰিছিলে। এই আইনৰ দ্বাৰা বংগদেশৰ গভৰ্ণৰৰ পদটো জেনেৰেললৈ উন্নতি কৰা হৈছিলে। তেওঁৰ কাম কাজৰ সহায়ত কৰিবৰ বাবে এখন 4জনীয়া কমিটি গঠন কৰা হয়। মুম্বাই আৰু মাদ্ৰাজৰ গভৰ্ণৰৰ দুজনক বংগৰ গভৰ্ণৰ জেনেৰেলৰ অধীনস্থ কৰা হয়। ৰেগুলেটিং এক্টৰ সাংবিধানিক যথেষ্ট গুৰুত্ব আছে। এই আইনমতে ইষ্ট ইণ্ডিয়া কোম্পানীৰ এইটো হ'ল ৰেগুলেটিং এক্টটো। চ' এই আইনৰ মতে যথেষ্ট ইষ্ট ইণ্ডিয়া কোম্পানীৰ ৰাজনৈতিক কাৰ্যত ভাৰতলৈ স্বীকৃতি দিয়া হৈছিলে। সিহঁতে এইটো আইনটোৱেই বনাই ল'লে, যোনটোৰ জৰিয়তে সিহঁতে ৰেগুলেটিং ইষ্ট ইণ্ডিয়া কোম্পানী সদায় মানে ইয়াতে কাম কৰিব পাৰে যাতে, আৰু কেতিয়াও এইটো কেনচেল হ'ব নোৱাৰে। সিহঁতৰ ফিল্ডখিনি সিহঁতে বনাই গৈ আছিলে। চ' তাৰপিছত ইয়াৰ দ্বাৰা ভাৰতত ব্ৰিটিছ চৰকাৰৰ স্থায়ী শাসনৰ পাতনি মেলা হৈছিলে। কিন্তু ৰেগুলেটিং এক্ট বংগৰ গভৰ্ণৰ জেনেৰেল গৰাকীৰ ক্ষমতা নিৰ্দিষ্ট কৰি নিদিয়াৰ বাবে পৰৱৰ্তী সময়ত এই আইন বিফলতা হৈছিলে। যেতিয়া বংগৰ তেওঁৰ গভৰ্ণৰক এইটো আইন ইনক্লুড কৰা নাছিলে কাৰণে এইটো আইন তেতিয়া কেনচেল হৈ গ'ল। কেনচেল হোৱা নাই, বিফল হ'লে। চ' এইটো আছিলে ৰেগুলেটিং এক্ট। দেন আমি পিটছ ইণ্ডিয়া আইন 1784 সেইটো চাওঁ। এইটোৰ মতে আছিলে ইংলেণ্ডৰ সংসদে সেইটো বিফলতা হোৱাৰ পিছত পুনৰ এখন আইন জাৰি কৰিলে। ব্ৰিটিছ শাসন ভাৰতবৰ্ষত সুদৃঢ় কৰি তুলিছিলে। এইখনে আছিলে 1784 খ্ৰীষ্টাব্দৰ আগষ্ট মাহত বলবৎ কৰা পিটৰ ভাৰত শাসন আইন বুলি, মানে পিটছ ইণ্ডিয়া এক্ট। এই আইন ইংলেণ্ডৰ প্ৰধানমন্ত্ৰী উইলিয়াম পিট কনিষ্টৰ নামেৰে নামকৰণ কৰা হৈছিলে। ইংলেণ্ডৰ আমাৰ ইয়াতে হৈছিলে ইণ্ডিয়াত, কিন্তু নামকৰণ হৈছিলে ইংলেণ্ডৰ প্ৰধানমন্ত্ৰী উইলিয়াম পিটাৰ কনিষ্টৰ যুৱৰাজ প্ৰিন্সেছ তেওঁৰ নামতে হৈছিলে। চ' এই আইন অনুসৰি ভাৰতৰ 6জনীয়া সদস্যৰে এখন নিয়ন্ত্ৰক মণ্ডলী গঠন কৰা হয়, আৰু এই সদস্যসকলে ভাৰতত কোম্পানীৰ কাম কাজৰ তদাৰক কৰিব। বংগদেশত গভৰ্ণৰ জেনেৰেলৰ পৰিষদৰ সদস্য সংখ্যা 4জনৰ ঠাইত 3জনলৈ হ্ৰাস কৰা হ'ল। তদুপৰি এখন আঞ্চলিক সভা গঠন কৰা হয়। ইয়াৰ সদস্যসকলে ইষ্ট ইণ্ডিয়া কোম্পানীৰ চাকৰিত নিযুক্ত আৰু বাতিলৰ অধিকাৰ লাভ কৰে। সিহঁতক এডো কৰিব পাৰিব আৰু বাতিলো কৰিব পাৰিব। তেতিয়া পিটৰ ভাৰত শাসন আইনে পৰৱৰ্তী ব্ৰিটিছ সাম্ৰাজ্যত শাসনৰ ভেটি স্থাপন কৰিছিলে, আৰু এই আইনৰ দ্বাৰাই বংগদেশৰ গভৰ্ণৰ জেনেৰেলৰ পদবীটোকো অধিক শক্তিশালী কৰা হৈছিলে। চব সিহঁতে বহুত কেইখন আইন প্ৰণয়ন কৰিছিলে। তাৰ মাজত ইম্পৰ্টেণ্ট এই দুখনো আছিলে, 1793, 1813, 1833 আৰু 1853 সিহঁতে আকৌ আইনসমূহ আৰু বিচাৰৰ পৰা ক্ৰমান্বয়ে কাৰণে এটা এইটো স্পিৰিট হয় আৰু ৰিফৰ্মছখিনি প্ৰভাইড কৰা হ'ল ডাইৰেক্টলি গোটেই এৰিয়া যিবোৰত লোকেল গভৰ্ণমেণ্ট আছে চব লোকেল গভৰ্ণমেণ্টত এইবোৰক স্প্ৰেড কৰা হ'ল পুৰা চ' মেক্সিমাম পপুলাৰ এইটোতে কি হ'ল মেক্সিমাম পপুলাৰ এইটোতে ৰিপ্ৰেজেণ্টেটিভ আৰু ফ্ৰীডমো আহি গ'ল প্ৰভিঞ্চিয়েল গভৰ্ণমেণ্টৰ কিছুমান ফ্ৰীডম আহি গ'ল তেতিয়া চ' এইবোৰত যথেষ্ট এটা এই ৰিফ্লেক্ট কৰিলে ডায়াৰচিৰ ছিষ্টেমত ৰিফ্লেক্ট কৰিলে যেতিয়া দুটা ছিষ্টেম লোকেলৰ কাৰণে এখন গভৰ্ণমেণ্টৰ নিচিনা বেলেগকৈ হৈ গ'ল তেতিয়া তাতে অট'মেটিক ডায়াৰচি ছিষ্টেমত আহি গ'ল চ' এই ডায়াৰচি ছিষ্টেমত এইটো ৰিফ্লেক্ট কৰিলে ডায়াৰচি ছিষ্টেমত তাৰপিছত দ্য গভৰ্ণমেণ্ট অফ ইণ্ডিয়া এইটো ৰেছপনচিবল হ'ল ৰেছপনচিবল কৰি দিলে ইণ্ডিয়া গভৰ্ণমেণ্টতে তথাপি ব্ৰিটিছ পাৰ্লিয়ামেণ্টকে ৰেছপনচিবল কৰা হৈ আছিলে বাট এই পপুলাৰ ৰিপ্ৰেজেণ্টেশ্যনৰ জৰিয়তে আকৌ কিছুমান স্পিৰিট যিবোৰ আছিলে এইবোৰৰ ৰিফৰ্ম কৰা হ'ল আকৌ কণ্ট্ৰল এই ব্ৰিটিছ পাৰ্লিয়ামেণ্টৰ যি পাৱাৰ ইণ্ডিয়া গভৰ্ণমেণ্টৰ ওপৰত এইটোও ৰিলেক্স হৈ গ'ল আৰু চেণ্ট্ৰেল গভৰ্ণমেণ্টৰ জৰিয়তে যি প্ৰভিঞ্চিয়েল গভৰ্ণমেণ্টলৈ এইটো ৰিডিউচ হয় যি ব্ৰিটিছ গভৰ্ণমেণ্টে যোনটো ইণ্ডিয়ান গভৰ্ণমেণ্টৰ যি পাৱাৰ আছিলে সেইটোও কমি গ'ল তাৰপিছত ইণ্ডিয়া গভৰ্ণমেণ্টত আকৌ যি চেণ্ট্ৰেল গভৰ্ণমেণ্টৰ যি পাৱাৰ আছিলে প্ৰভিঞ্চিয়েল গভৰ্ণমেণ্টৰ ওপৰত সেইটোও কমি গ'ল চ' অট'মেটিকেলি এটা ডায়াৰচি ছিষ্টেমত আহি গ'ল এইটো আকৌ 1919ত হ'ল এই ডায়াৰচি ছিষ্টেমটো তো তাতে আমি আকৌ চাওঁ কি প্ৰদেশসমূহত ডায়াৰকিৰ এইটো আছিলে মণ্টেগু কেম্পছফৰ্ড সংস্কাৰ 1919 তাৰপিছত আহি গ'ল প্ৰদেশসমূহত ডায়াৰকিৰ যন্ত্ৰপাতিবোৰ যিবোৰ এতিয়া প্ৰভিঞ্চত গোটেইখিনি আহি গ'ল যেতিয়া প্ৰভিঞ্চক পাৱাৰ দিয়া হ'ল তেতিয়া অট'মেটিকেলি প্ৰভিঞ্চতে গোটেই বস্তুবোৰ আহিব লাগিব চ' এইটো ডায়াৰচি ছিষ্টেমটো ইণ্ট্ৰডিউচ হোৱাৰ লগে লগে কি হ'ল ডায়াৰচিখন দুটা ভাগ হৈ গ'ল এটা হ'ল চেণ্ট্ৰেল আৰু এটা হ'ল প্ৰভিঞ্চিয়েল চেণ্ট্ৰেল যি হয় চেণ্ট্ৰেলৰ মুখ্য আছিলে গভৰ্ণৰ জেনেৰেল আৰু প্ৰভিঞ্চিয়েলৰ মুখ্য আছিলে প্ৰভিঞ্চিয়েল জেনেৰেল চ' প্ৰভিঞ্চিয়েলৰ এক্সক্লুচিভ কণ্ট্ৰল আছিলে তেওঁৰ গভৰ্ণৰ জেনেৰেলৰ এক্সক্লুচিভ কণ্ট্ৰল আছিলে কিন্তু প্ৰভিঞ্চিয়েল জেনেৰেল আছিলে কি ইণ্ডিয়ান উইল ইলেক্ট ইণ্ডিয়ান এইটো এটা হৈছে ইণ্ডিয়ান পিপুল ভাৰতীয় যিবোৰ আছে ভাৰতীয়বোৰেই ভাৰতীয় প্ৰতিনিধিগণ ভাৰতীয় ইলেক্ট কৰিব মানে ইণ্ডিয়ান পিপুল উইল ইলেক্ট ইণ্ডিয়ান উইল ইলেক্ট ইণ্ডিয়ান পিপুল এইটো এটা সেন্টেন্সৰ নিচিনা আছিলে যে ইণ্ডিয়ান উইল ইলেক্ট ইণ্ডিয়ান পিপুল চ' এইটো এটা এইটোৰ ওপৰতে আকৌ যেতিয়া এইখিনি হ'ল ইলেক্ট হ'ল তেতিয়া তাৰপিছত আকৌ দুটা ভাগ হৈ গ'ল এটা হ'ল ৰিজাৰ্ভ আৰু এটা হ'ল ট্ৰেন্সফাৰ্ড চ' ৰিজাৰ্ভটো হ'ল কি ৰিজাৰ্ভটোত হ'ল কোনো ৰিজাৰ্ভক যিবোৰ আছে তেওঁক বেলেগ ইণ্ডিয়ান যিবোৰ মিনিষ্টাৰ হ'ব তেওঁলোকে কি কৰিব নোৱাৰিব যেনে ইলেকশ্যন হ'ল তেতিয়া চব মিনিষ্টাৰ হৈ গ'ল মিনিষ্টাৰৰ ৰুলত গ'ল চ' এতিয়া ৰিজাৰ্ভ যিবোৰ হ'ব এইবোৰক কোনো ইণ্ডিয়ান মিনিষ্টাৰে বা যিবোৰ প্ৰভিঞ্চৰ পৰা যিবোৰ মিনিষ্টাৰ হোৱা তেওঁলোকে কি কৰিব নোৱাৰিব কোনোবা অৰ্ডাৰ দিব নোৱাৰিব সাপোজ কিছুমান যিবোৰ আমাৰ যিবোৰ কিছুমান বস্তু যেনেকা এডুকেশ্যন হেল্থৰ প্ৰব্লেম বা এডুকেশ্যনেল প্ৰব্লেম বা ফিনেন্স বা ল এণ্ড অৰ্ডাৰ এইবোৰৰ ক্ষেত্ৰত সাপোজ ল এণ্ড অৰ্ডাৰ বা ফিনেন্স এইবোৰ ৰিজাৰ্ভ হৈ গ'ল মানে অনলি গভৰ্ণৰ জেনেৰেল অফ চেণ্ট্ৰেল কেন অৰ্ডাৰ এণ্ড কেন কিবা আইডিয়া বা কিবা পৰামৰ্শ বা বুদ্ধি এইবোৰ দিবৰ কাৰণে তেওঁহে হস্তক্ষেপ কৰিব মিনিষ্টাৰ কেন নট কোনো মিনিষ্টাৰ বা কোনোবাই তেওঁ এইটো বস্তু হাত দিব নোৱাৰিব সাপোজ যদি আকৌ এডুকেশ্যনৰ ক্ষেত্ৰ হয় বা এই যেনেকা হেল্থ এইবোৰৰ হয়, তেতিয়া এইবোৰ হ'ব ট্ৰেন্সফাৰ্ড, মানে এইবোৰত তেওঁলোকে হস্তক্ষেপ কৰিব পাৰিব বা কিবা চেঞ্জ কৰিব পাৰিব বা কোনো ডিচিশ্যন ল'ব পাৰিব, কিবা কৰিব পাৰিব ইণ্ডিয়ান মিনিষ্টাৰবোৰে। কিন্তু যি ৰিজাৰ্ভ হ'ব তাতে কোনো একো ৰিজাৰ্ভ কৰিব নোৱাৰিব। চ' এইবোৰ ৰিজাৰ্ভ ছাবজেক্টছ এইটো কি আছিলে, ট্ৰেন্সফাৰ ছাবজেক্ট দুটা পুৰা বেলেগ হয়। যিটো ট্ৰেন্সফাৰ টু ৰিজাৰ্ভটো ছেফ হয়, যি গোটেই পুৰা চেণ্ট্ৰেলৰ আণ্ডাৰত হ'ব। চ' তেনেকাই ছিষ্টেম হ'ল। তাৰপিছত এফেক্টিভ পাৱাৰ্ছবোৰক কমপ্লিট এডমিনিষ্ট্ৰেশ্যন ক্ষেত্ৰত দিয়া হ'ল। তাৰপিছত গোটেইখিনি পাৱাৰ দিয়াৰ পিছতো কিছুমান দেখা গ'ল আকৌ যে এক্সপেৰিমেণ্ট অফ ডায়াৰ্চি তাতে ফেইল হ'ল। চ' ইণ্ডিয়ান নেশ্যনেল কংগ্ৰেছ সেইটো কাৰণে তাৰপিছত আকৌ 2020 যিটো ইলেকশ্যন হৈছিলে এইটো ডায়াৰ্চিৰ ক্ষেত্ৰত এইটো এটা ইম্পৰ্টেণ্ট পইণ্ট যে ডায়াৰ্চিৰ ক্ষেত্ৰত ইণ্ডিয়ান নেশ্যনেল কংগ্ৰেছে এইটো ইলেকশ্যনৰ ক্ষেত্ৰত কি কৰিলে, সিহঁতে এইটো বস্তু 1920 যোনটো ইলেকশ্যন হৈছিলে সেইটো সিহঁতে বয়কট কৰিলে। তাৰপিছত আকৌ সিহঁতে ইয়াতে কিছুমান লোকেল গভৰ্ণমেণ্টৰ, এডুকেশ্যনৰ, ছ'চিয়েল ৱেলফেয়াৰ এইবোৰৰ ক্ষেত্ৰত কিছুমান সিহঁতে অলপ ৰিফৰ্ম কৰিলে। আৰু অলমষ্ট গোটেই প্ৰভিন্সতে ভোটৰ অধিকাৰটো দিয়া হ'ল, আৰু এইটো এক্সটেণ্ড কৰি মহিলাসকলকো দিয়া হ'ল। তেতিয়া কি কৰিছিলে, মহিলাসকলৰ সেইটো সময়ত যথেষ্ট চাফাৰ কৰি আছিলে, কিন্তু সিহঁতৰ জৰিয়তে এইখিনি মহিলাসকলেও এইখিনি সুবিধাখিনি পালে। তাৰপিছত ডায়াৰ্চিটো ফেইল্ড হ'ল, বাট এইটো ফেইল্ড হ'লেও এইটো লাহে লাহে ফেডাৰেল গভৰ্ণমেণ্টৰ ফালে গুচি আহিলে। ডায়াৰ্চিটো ডাইৰেক্টলি ফেইল হৈ পেলাই সেই ৰাস্তাটো টাৰ্ণ হৈ কিনি কি হ'ল, এতিয়া ফেডাৰেল গভৰ্ণমেণ্টৰ ফালে গুচি আহিলে, যিটো ৰিপ্ৰেজেণ্টেটিভে বা ৰেছপনচিবল, যিটো ৰিপ্ৰেজেণ্টেটিভো হয়, ৰেছপনচিবলো হয়। চ' ইণ্ডিয়ান নেশ্যনেল কংগ্ৰেছে এইখিনি আকৌ চেঞ্জ কৰি পেলাই সিহঁতে কেনচেল কৰি সিহঁতে আকৌ ইয়াতে ৰিফৰ্ম কৰিলে। চ' এইটো মেচিনাৰী ডায়াৰ্চি এট দ্য প্ৰভিন্সেছ সেইটো কাৰণে হ'ল। তাৰপিছত যেতিয়া এইবোৰ হ'ল, তেতিয়া আকৌ বহুত কেইটা এক্ট ষ্টাৰ্ট হ'ল, যিবোৰ ইণ্ডিয়ান এক্ট। তেতিয়া আমাৰ লাহে লাহে এইটো সিহঁতে প্ৰভিন্সৰ হওক যি হওক ইণ্ডিয়ান নেশ্যনেল কংগ্ৰেছে পাই গ'ল, আৰু সিহঁতে তেতিয়া আমি এইখিনিৰ পৰা যদি আমি জানিব পাৰোঁ, তেনেহ'লে তাতে বহুত ব্ৰিটিছ শাসনৰ বা সম্প্ৰসাৰণৰ ক্ষেত্ৰত আমি যথেষ্ট এইখিনি জানিব পাৰোঁ যে সিহঁতৰ শাসনকালত সিহঁতে যথেষ্টখিনি সিহঁতে যথেষ্ট আগবাঢ়ি আছিলে, আৰু প্ৰভিন্সিয়েল অট'নমি হওক বা এই যিবোৰ মন্ত্ৰীমেণ্ট এইখিনিৰ ক্ষেত্ৰতো সিহঁতে যথেষ্ট আগবঢ়াই দিছিলে। আৰু যিবোৰ আমাৰ ইণ্ডিয়ান নেশ্যনেল কংগ্ৰেছৰ যি ষ্টেপবোৰ আহিছিলে, অনলি সিহঁতে ব্ৰিটিছৰ কাৰণে এইখিনি সিহঁতে কৰিব পাৰিছিলে বা সিহঁতে বেনিফিটেড হৈছিলে। চ' এই মণ্টিমৰলে সংস্কাৰ আৰু মণ্টেগু চেমছফৰ্ড সংস্কাৰ, তাৰপিছত প্ৰদেশসমূহৰ যি ডায়েৰী যন্ত্ৰপাতি, যিবোৰ ডায়াৰ্চিৰ ষ্টাৰ্ট, গোটেইবোৰ তেওঁলোকে ফাইনেলি গৈ ইণ্ডিয়ানৰ ক্ষেত্ৰতে সিহঁতে বেনিফিটেড হৈছিলে। আৰু লাষ্টত গৈ আমাৰ যিবোৰ ৰিফৰ্ম হৈছিলে, এই ৰিফৰ্মখিনিত আমাৰ ফাইনেলি গৈ আমাৰে এইখিনি বেনিফিটেড হৈছিলে। চ' টোটেলি যদি আমি এইখিনি ক'ব যাওঁ টু দ্য পইণ্টত, তেনেহ'লে ফাৰ্ষ্টৰ পৰা পইণ্ট ৱাইজ আমি গ'লে এইখিনি ক'ব পাৰোঁ যে ভাৰতবৰ্ষত ফৰাচী প্ৰভাৱ লুপ্ত কৰে আৰু ব্ৰিটিছসকলৰ উত্থান প্ৰসাৰ আৰু আধিপত্য বিস্তাৰৰ পথ এই যুদ্ধ যি হৈছিলে ভাৰতবৰ্ষত আন্দিৱাছৰ, সেইটো যুদ্ধৰ পিছত ভাৰতবৰ্ষৰ ফৰাচী প্ৰভাৱ লুপ্ত কৰে আৰু ব্ৰিটিছসকলৰ উত্থান প্ৰসাৰ এইবোৰ বিস্তাৰ সুগম হয়। তাৰপিছত বংগদেশত ব্ৰিটিছ কোম্পানীয়ে আৰম্ভণিৰ পৰাই সিহঁতৰ যথেষ্ট মনোযোগ দিছিলে আৰু চিৰাজউদ্দৌলাই 1756 খ্ৰীষ্টাব্দত ফৰ্ট উইলিয়াম দুৰ্গ দখল কৰিছিলে। তেতিয়া 1757 খ্ৰীষ্টাব্দত আকৌ পলাচী নামত ঠাইতো নবাবৰ লগত ব্ৰিটিছৰ ৰণ হৈছিলে আৰু পলাচী যুদ্ধৰ জয়ী হৈ ব্ৰিটিছে প্ৰভুত্ব বিস্তাৰৰ সুবিধা পাইছিলে। চ' তাৰপিছত এই মোগলৰ সময়ৰ পৰা যদি আমি চাবলৈ যাওঁ তেনেহ'লে যেতিয়া মোগল ষ্ট্ৰং হৈ আছিলে তেতিয়া কিন্তু ব্ৰিটিছ এণ্ট্ৰি কৰিব পৰা নাছিলে, সিহঁতে জাষ্ট ট্ৰায়েল মাৰি আছিলে। কিন্তু যে ঔৰংগজেব যেতিয়া আফটাৰ ঔৰংগজেব তেওঁলোকে এইখিনিত সুযোগটো লৈছিলে আৰু এই সুযোগটো লৈহে সিহঁতে ইয়াতে যথেষ্ট লাভ কৰিছিলে। তাৰপিছত কেইজনমান যেনেকা লৰ্ড সত্যবিলোপ নথি লৰ্ড ডালহাউচিয়ে কি কৰিছিলে, সত্যবিলোপ নীতি প্ৰয়োগ কৰি 1839 খ্ৰীষ্টাব্দত মন্দতী, তাৰপিছত 1840 খ্ৰীষ্টাব্দত কলাবা, তাৰপিছত 1844ত ভাগলপুৰ, উদয়পুৰ, নাগপুৰ এইবিলাক গোটেইবোৰ সিহঁতে কি কৰিছিলে এইখন অন্তৰ্ভুক্ত কৰিছিলে ব্ৰিটিছ ৰাজ্য সিহঁতৰ এৰিয়াত। তাৰপিছত এই নীতি প্ৰয়োগ কৰি লৰ্ড ডালহাউচিয়ে কৰ্ণাটকৰ নবাব চুৰাট এইবোৰ গোটেই যিমান সা সুবিধা আছিলে গোটেইবোৰ তেওঁ কাঢ়ি লৈছিলে। এইখিনি তেওঁ যিবোৰে সিহঁতে একো কৰ দিব নোৱাৰিছিলে সিহঁতৰ পৰা প্ৰপাৰ্টিখিনি বা মাটিখিনি লৈছিলে, লৈ কিনি সিহঁতে এইখিনি বেলেগলৈ বেলেগক দিছিলে আৰু তেতিয়া তাতে কি হৈছিলে নতুন নতুন ধনীবিলাক আহিছিলে, যিবোৰৰ জৰিয়তে যিবিলাক দুখীয়া কৃষক আছিলে সিহঁতেও যথেষ্ট সিহঁতে লুজাৰ হৈ আছিলে আৰু সিহঁতে ইমান এইটো বস্তু যে সিহঁতত বেনিফিটেড হোৱা নাছিলে। চ' এইবোৰৰ জৰিয়তে সিহঁতে যথেষ্ট এটা বেয়া দিনত দেখা পাই আছিলে আৰু ব্ৰিটিছসকলেও যথেষ্ট সিহঁতে নিজৰ পাৱাৰখিনি দি আছিলে। চ' ভাৰতৰ ইষ্ট ইণ্ডিয়া কোম্পানীৰ শাসনৰ নিয়ন্ত্ৰণতা ব্ৰিটিছ সংসদে ৰেগুলেটিং এক্ট নামে এখন আইন প্ৰণয়ন কৰি বলবৎ কৰিছিলে আৰু এই আইনৰ দ্বাৰাই বংগদেশত গভৰ্ণৰৰ পদটো গভৰ্ণৰ জেনেৰেললৈ উন্নতি হৈছিলে আৰু পিট এক্টৰ জৰিয়তেও। চ' এইবোৰ আমি যদি চাবলৈ যাওঁ তেনেহ'লে মৰ্লি মিণ্টো সংস্কাৰ আৰু মণ্টেগু চেমছফোৰ্ড সংস্কাৰৰ জৰিয়তে লাষ্টত গৈ প্ৰদেশসমূহত যি ডায়াৰচিৰ যি যন্ত্ৰপাতি হৈছিলে এইখিনিৰ জৰিয়তে যে যথেষ্ট এটা ইণ্ডিয়ান নেশ্যনেল কংগ্ৰেছে আগবাঢ়ি গৈছিলে আৰু লাহে লাহে সিহঁতে ব্ৰিটিছ এডমিনিষ্ট্ৰেশ্যনৰ পৰা আমাৰ ইণ্ডিয়ান নেশ্যনেল কংগ্ৰেছলৈ যি এডমিনিষ্ট্ৰেশ্যনটো সেইটো আহিব পাৰিছিলে। চ' জেনেৰেলি যদি আমি দেখিব যাওঁ তেনেহ'লে ব্ৰিটিছে কিছুমান যিবোৰ সংস্কাৰ কৰিছিলে, তাৰপিছত সিহঁতে থাকাকালীন যথেষ্টখিনি সংস্কাৰ কৰিছিলে আমাৰ এই দেশত, যিবোৰ কোম্পানী চৰকাৰৰ যেনেকা ধৰ্মীয় দিশতে হওক, সাংস্কৃতিক দিশত বা সামাজিক দিশতে হওক এটা যথেষ্ট ভাৰতবৰ্ষত সিহঁতে এটা কিছুমান এৰি থৈ গৈছিলে। চ' যদিও এইটো সময়ত লৰ্ড ডালহৌচি যেনেকা তেওঁৰ নিচিনা লৰ্ড কৰ্ণৱালিছ তেনেকা কেইজনমান ব্ৰিটিছৰ কাৰণে আমাৰ দেশত যথেষ্ট এটা বস্তুবোৰ হৈছিলে। চ' ব্ৰিটিছ সময়ৰ শাসনৰ সময়ত বিচাৰ ব্যৱস্থাটো কিছু সাল সলনি কৰা হৈছিলে। পূৰ্বৱৰ্তী ভাৰতীয় সাম্ৰাজ্যবোৰৰ বিভিন্ন ঠাইত ভিন ভিন আইন কানুন চলিছিলে। তাৰ পৰিৱৰ্তে ইষ্ট ইণ্ডিয়া কোম্পানীয়ে সমগ্ৰ ভাৰততে এক এক ধৰণৰে আইন আদালত স্থাপন কৰি দিছিলে। লৰ্ড কৰ্ণৱালিছে বিচাৰৰ সুবিধাৰ বাবে দেৱানী বা সদৰ নিজামত আদালতত ফৌজদাৰী গোচৰৰ আদালতৰ কিছু সাল সলনি কৰিছিলে। তাৰপিছত লৰ্ড উইলিয়াম বেণ্টিঙৰ দিনত কলিকতা, মাদ্ৰাজ আৰু মুম্বাইৰ উচ্চ ন্যায়ালয়ৰ প্ৰতিষ্ঠা কৰা হৈছিলে আৰু আদালতত পাৰ্চী ভাষাৰ পৰিৱৰ্তে মাতৃভাষাৰ প্ৰয়োগ কৰা হৈছিলে। গভৰ্ণৰ জেনেৰেল লৰ্ড ময়ৰা বা হেষ্টিংছৰ ভাৰতীয় লোকক আদালতত নিয়োগ কৰিছিলে আৰু ভাৰতীয় মুন্সিফসকলৰো ক্ষমতা বৃদ্ধি কৰিছিলে। এই দেশৰ লোকসকলৰ প্ৰিয় পাত্ৰ হৈছিলে। এইখিনি যে কৰা নাই যে প্ৰশাসনীয় সংস্কাৰৰ ক্ষেত্ৰত এইখিনি কৰিছিলে। আকৌ ৰাজহ সংস্কাৰৰ ক্ষেত্ৰতো কোম্পানীৰ এই চৰকাৰৰ আগতে ভাৰতবৰ্ষৰ ৰায়তভাৰী ব্যৱস্থা প্ৰচলন আছিলে। খেতিয়কে বা ৰায়তে ৰজাঘৰৰ নিজে খাজনা দিব পাৰিছিলে। ব্ৰিটিছসকলে শাসন কাৰ্য সুচাৰুৰূপে পৰিচালনা কৰিবলৈ ভাৰতৰ যি ৰাজহ ব্যৱস্থাত যি সংস্কাৰ আছিলে এইবোৰো যথেষ্ট পৰিৱৰ্তন আনিছিলে। লৰ্ড কৰ্ণৱালিছ ৰাজত্ব কালটো তেওঁ সংশোধন কৰা ৰাজহ ব্যৱস্থাৰ বাবে উল্লেখযোগ্য আছিলে। পূৰ্বৰ কোম্পানীৰ শাসনৰ সময়ত থকা 5 বছৰীয়া নাইবা এবছৰীয়া ৰাজহ ব্যৱস্থাৰ চিৰস্থায়ী বন্দোবস্ত ৰাজহ ব্যৱস্থাৰো প্ৰচলন কৰিছিলে। এইবোৰ চালে আমি বুজিব পাৰোঁ যে তেওঁলোকৰ যথেষ্ট অৱদান আমাৰ তাত আছে। আৰু এও পূৰ্বৰ কোম্পানীৰ শাসনৰ যি এইবোৰৰ পৰা চেঞ্জ কৰি দিয়া আৰু জমিদাৰ শ্ৰেণীক ক্ষমতা যি চেঞ্জ, এইটো কিছুমান বস্তু সিহঁতৰ এই অলপ চিৰস্থায়ী বন্দোবস্তুটো যদিও প্ৰচলন কৰিছিলে, কিন্তু এইটোৰ জৰিয়তে জমিদাৰসকলে চিৰস্থায়ী বন্দোবস্তুটো কি আছিলে, এইটোৰ জৰিয়তে জমিদাৰসকলে মাটি ভোগ কৰাৰ অধিকাৰ পাইছিল যদিও চৰকাৰে বিচৰা নিৰ্দিষ্ট ধন বা ৰাজহ দিব নোৱাৰিলে সেই জমিদাৰৰ মাটিখিনি আকৌ চৰকাৰৰ অধীনলৈ ঘূৰাই দিয়া হৈছিলে। আৰু এই ব্যৱস্থাই জমিদাৰ শ্ৰেণীক যথেষ্ট ক্ষমতাশালী কৰিছিলে, যদিও কৃষকসকলে যথেষ্ট পৰিমাণৰ দুৰ্ভোগ বা ভুগিবলগীয়া হৈছিলে। ব্ৰিটিছ আমি 1935ৰ গভৰ্ণমেণ্ট সেইটো যোৱাৰ পিছত আগতে গভৰ্ণমেণ্ট অফ ইণ্ডিয়ান এক্ট 1935 সেইটোত যোৱাৰ আগতে আমি এইখিনি অলপ ক'ব বিচাৰি আছোঁ যে ব্ৰিটিছসকলে কি কৰিছে আমাৰ কাৰণে বা সংস্কাৰবোৰ কৰিব বিচাৰি আছে। এইখিনি কৰিছে। তাৰপিছত আৰু শিক্ষা সংস্কাৰতো সিহঁতে যথেষ্ট আগবঢ়াই দিছে। পূৰ্বতে ভাৰতীয় শিক্ষা আছিলে মূলতঃ ধৰ্মমূলক, যেনেকৈ সংস্কৃত, পাৰ্চী এইবোৰে মেক্সিমাম চলিছিলে। কিন্তু শিক্ষাৰ্থীসকলক হিন্দু শিক্ষাৰ্থীসকলক টুলত দিয়া হৈছিলে আৰু মুছলিম শিক্ষাৰ্থীসকলক মাদ্ৰাছাত বা এনেকুৱা মুক্তাবত শিক্ষা গ্ৰহণ কৰিছিলে। কিন্তু 1781ত ৰবেন হেষ্টিংছে কলিকতাত মাদ্ৰাছা এখনো খুলিছিলে আৰু 1992ত জনানন ডানকান নামৰ এখন ব্ৰিটিছ বিষয়াই বাৰাণসীত সংস্কৃত কলেজ এখন খুলিছিলে। এইবোৰ শিক্ষানুষ্ঠানত প্ৰাৰম্ভিক পৰ্যায়ত পুৰণি পদ্ধতিৰে জ্যোতিষ বা ব্যাকৰণৰ শিক্ষা দিয়া হৈছিলে। সেই সময়তে ইংলেণ্ডত উদ্যোগিক শিক্ষাৰ প্ৰসাৰ লাভ কৰিছিলে, যিহেতু সিহঁতে কি কৰি আছিলে, বিজনেছ মাইণ্ডেড আছিলে যথেষ্ট। সেইটোৰ কাৰণে তেওঁলোকে নিজৰ সুবিধাৰ কাৰণে তেওঁলোকক যেনেকা ফাৰ্চী হওক বা সংস্কৃত এইখিনি সিহঁতে ভালকে বুজিব নোৱাৰিছিলে। সেইটো কাৰণে সিহঁতে বিজনেছত সিহঁতৰ লেংগুৱেজৰ কাৰণে অলপ প্ৰব্লেম হৈ আছিলে কাৰণে সিহঁতে কি কৰিলে, ইংলিছটো ষ্টাৰ্ট কৰি দিলে দেট ডেভেলপমেণ্টো হয় আৰু ইংৰাজী মাধ্যমত এইটো পাশ্চাত্য শিক্ষা আমি ৱেষ্টাৰ্ণ এডুকেশ্যন বুলি কওঁ যাক। সাধাৰণতে শ্ৰেণীৰ ভাৰতীয়সকলে যাতে ইংৰাজী ভাষাটো আয়ত্ত কৰিব পাৰে আৰু এই শ্ৰেণীটোক শ্ৰমিক বা বনুৱা হিচাপে যাতে খৰচেৰে কোম্পানীৰ চৰকাৰে উপযুক্ত বজাৰ হিচাপে ব্যৱহৃত হৈছে। লাহে লাহে ইংৰাজী ভাষাৰ প্ৰচলনক তেওঁক গুৰুত্ব দিবলৈ ধৰিলে আৰু পিছলৈ পাশ্চাত্য শিক্ষাৰ সৈতে সংগতি ৰাখি লৰ্ড উইলিয়াম বেণ্টিংকৰ দিনত শিক্ষাৰ মাধ্যমত ইংৰাজীটো বাধ্যতামূলক কৰিছিলে। আৰু তেতিয়া পাশ্চাত্য শিক্ষাত মানুহৰ এই ইচ্ছাটো অলপ বাঢ়ি গৈছিলে, বঢ়াইছিল আৰু সংস্কৃত আৰু পাৰ্চী ভাষাৰ চৰ্চা কমি গৈছিলে। চ' গভৰ্ণৰ জেনেৰেল লৰ্ড ডালহৌচিয়ে ভাৰতীয় শিক্ষা ব্যৱস্থাত আৰু কিছু সাল সলনি ঘটাই চাৰ্লছ ইউডৰ বিখ্যাত প্ৰেৰণ পত্ৰতা ভাৰতীয় শিক্ষা প্ৰণালীৰ ৰূপৰেখা প্ৰস্তুত কৰি দিয়ে। তাৰপিছত এইবোৰৰ জৰিয়তে উচ্চ ইংৰাজী বিদ্যালয় আৰু কেইবাখনো মহাবিদ্যালয় তেওঁ স্থাপন কৰিছিলে। লৰ্ড ডালহাউচিৰ দিনত ভাৰতীয় সংস্কৃতি সাহিত্যত পুনৰ চৰ্চাৰ হৈছিলে, যিবোৰ উন্নতি হোৱা। তাৰপিছত আমাৰ বংগদেশৰ ঈশ্বৰচন্দ্ৰ বিদ্যাসাগৰ আৰু অসমৰ আনন্দৰাম বৰুৱাই এই সময়ত সংস্কৃত সাহিত্যৰ উৎকৰ্ষ সাধন কৰিছিলে। তেওঁলোকে ঈশ্বৰচন্দ্ৰ বিদ্যাসাগৰ আৰু আনন্দৰাম বৰুৱাই সিহঁতেও যথেষ্ট এইখিনিৰ পৰা ভাল পাইছিলে। তাৰপিছত ব্ৰিটিছ গভৰ্ণৰসকলে সংস্কাৰসমূহত ভাৰতীয় সমাজ আৰু অৰ্থনীতিত যথেষ্ট প্ৰভাৱ পেলাইছিলে, যি প্ৰভাৱ এইটোৰ অৰ্থনীতি অট'মেটিক যেতিয়া বিজনেছৰ ক্ষেত্ৰত বা পঢ়া শুনাৰ ক্ষেত্ৰত যেতিয়া গুৰুত্ব দিছিলে, তেতিয়া বিজনেছৰ ক্ষেত্ৰতো বস্তুবোৰ বাঢ়ি গৈছিলে। আৰু তেওঁলোকে আছিলে, ব্ৰিটিছসকল মেইনলি আছিলে পুঁজিবাদী জাতি। নিজৰ লাভৰ প্ৰতি লক্ষ্য ৰাখি তেওঁলোকৰ পৰম্পৰাগত ভাৰতীয় অৰ্থনীতিৰ গাঁথনি ভাঙি আধুনিক শিল্প বাণিজ্যৰ প্ৰসাৰ ঘটায়। সেইটো সিহঁতৰে লাভটো বেছিকে চাব। যদিও বাণিজ্যৰ প্ৰসাৰৰ ব্ৰিটিছ চৰকাৰে যাতায়াতৰ ব্যৱস্থা বাণিজ্য কৰিবৰ কাৰণে এতিয়া যাতায়াতৰ ব্যৱস্থা ব্ৰিটিছসকলে যথেষ্ট আগবঢ়াইছিলে। যেনেকা ৰেল ব্যৱস্থাটো ৰেলটো স্থাপন কৰিছিলে লৰ্ড কৰ্ণৱালিছে সেইটো। তাৰপিছত যোগাযোগ ব্যৱস্থাটো ব্ৰিটিছসকলে যাতায়াত যোগাযোগৰ কাৰণে লৰ্ড কৰ্ণৱালিছৰ ভূমিৰ চিৰস্থায়ী বন্দোবস্তই জমিদাৰ শ্ৰেণীক সৃষ্টি কৰি কৃষক আলিকৈ পেলাই দিছিলে, যে লৰ্ড হেণ্টিংছে এনে ব্যৱস্থা আঁতৰাই আকৌ কৃষকসকলক ভূমি পাট্টা দি তেওঁলোকক অৱস্থাৰ উন্নতি কৰিছিলে। যি এজনে যদি অলপ কিবা কৰিছিলে, অধঃপতন কৰিছিলে, তেতিয়া আন এজন ব্ৰিটিছে সেইখিনি তেওঁলোকে উন্নতিও কৰি দিছিলে। চ' ভাৰতীয় ধৰ্ম আৰু সামাজিক সংস্কাৰৰ কোম্পানী চৰকাৰৰ ভূমিকা মন কৰিবলগীয়া হয়। ব্ৰিটিছ আমলত পাশ্চাত্য শিক্ষাৰ পোহৰ পৰাত ব্ৰিটিছ চৰকাৰে ভাৰতীয় সমাজ বা ধৰ্মীয় ব্যৱস্থাত হস্তক্ষেপ কৰা নাছিলে, কিন্তু ভাৰতীয় সমাজত যি ধৰ্মৰ ক্ষেত্ৰত নামত এনে কিছুমান কুসংস্কাৰ আছিলে, এইবোৰ তেওঁলোকে পিছলৈ সমাজ সংস্কাৰৰ প্ৰতি মনোনিৱেশ কৰিবলৈ বাধ্য কৰাইছিলে। আৰু এইবোৰক জেনেৰেল জন চুৰে হয়। এই ভাগত মধ্য ভাৰত, পাঞ্জাৱ কন্যা সন্তান হত্যা কৰাটো বন্ধ কৰিছিলে। 18 শতিকাৰ শেষত যিবোৰ কন্যা সন্তান হত্যা কৰা হৈছিলে, এইবোৰ তেওঁ বন্ধ কৰিছিলে। চ' এইবোৰ চালে আমি যথেষ্টখিনি জানিব পাৰোঁ যে আমাৰ যিবোৰ ব্ৰিটিছসকলে ইষ্ট ইণ্ডিয়া কোম্পানীৰ জৰিয়তে যিবিলাক আমাৰ কিছুমান উপকাৰো কৰি গৈছে, সেইখিনিও আমি জানিব পাৰোঁ। চ' 1806 খ্ৰীষ্টাব্দত এজনে সতীদাহ প্ৰথা ৰোধ কৰিবলৈ লৰ্ড ৱেলেছিছৰ সৰ্বপ্ৰথমে লিখিত অনুৰোধ কৰিছিলে, আৰু 1815 আৰু 1817ত জৰিয়তে চ' এইখিনি চেপ্টাৰটোত আজি আমাৰ ইয়ালৈকে আছিলে। এইটো চেপ্টাৰত যি খ্ৰীষ্টাব্দটো এইটো নেক্সটত আমি আকৌ কিছুমান চেপ্টাৰ যেনেকা গভৰ্ণমেণ্ট অফ ইণ্ডিয়া এক্ট 1935, তাৰপিছত প্ৰভিন্সিয়েল অট'নমি, তাৰপিছত ফিচাৰ্ছ অফ ব্ৰিটিছ এডমিনিষ্ট্ৰেশ্যন ইনফ্লুৱেঞ্চিং ইণ্ডিয়ান এডমিনিষ্ট্ৰেশ্যন, এইখিনি আমি নেক্সট কালি এইখিনি আমি আলোচনা কৰিম নেক্সট ক্লাছত। চ' আজি আমি এইটো ক্লাছত ইমানখিনি ক'লোঁ যে মণ্টিমাৰ্লে প্ৰদেশসমূহৰ ডায়াৰচিছ ছিষ্টেমলৈকে, আৰু এক্সট্ৰা মই কিছুমান যিবোৰ ব্ৰিটিছে যিবোৰ কিছুমান সংস্কাৰ আমাৰ ভাৰতবৰ্ষত ভাল যিবোৰ কৰি গৈছে সেইখিনি মই এক্সট্ৰাকৈ কৈ দিলোঁ, যিবোৰ বুজিবৰ কাৰণে অলপ সহজ হয় তেতিয়া। আৰু নেক্সটত আমি এই চেপ্টাৰৰ নেক্সটখিনি কৰিম। আশা কৰি আজি মই এইটো ক্লাছ এইখিনি সমাপ্ত কৰিছোঁ। নমস্কাৰ।